Chapter 221, The Professional Repairman. When Harry sat down, he clutched the cloth bag containing the remnants of his Nimbus 2001 tightly. The two old men in the office had already guessed the reason for Harry's visit. "Minerva came by earlier today and mentioned your situation, including your broomstick," Professor Lupin said, rubbing his hands in front of the roaring fireplace. Surprisingly, it wasn't Atticus Blaine, the head of the office, who spoke, but Professor Lupin. "You can tell she's worried about the Gryffindor team's future this year." Harry's face fell, reflecting his mood. Since his encounter with the Dementors, the Gryffindor team was on the brink of elimination. He wondered if he should apologize to Professor McGonagall, as she had given him the broom in his first year. Now, due to his weakness, it lay in pieces. Sensing Harry's distress, Professor Lupin quickly added, "Minerva cares more about you than the competition." "Indeed," Professor Blaine interjected. "I was also on the receiving end of Professor McGonagall's concerns." "But what does that have to do with you?" Harry asked, surprised. "Well, Professor McGonagall believes," Atticus scratched his head and grinned, "that if I had been on the field, I might have noticed the Dementors before they invaded the campus. It's a lesson learned. I'm planning to discuss with the college deans about registering events with large gatherings in advance so I can ensure proper supervision." "That's a great idea, Atticus," Lupin nodded approvingly. "Even without additional threats, having someone to oversee events can prevent conflicts among students. It happened quite often during my time at Hogwarts." Professor Blaine and Professor Lupin continued discussing the reporting process. Harry listened intently, not minding their temporary neglect of him. "So," Professor Blaine suddenly turned his attention to Harry, "you came here for me to take a look at your broom, Potter?" "Yes, Professor," Harry replied, standing up nervously. He had been holding the cloth bag the entire time, making it impossible for someone like Professor Blaine to miss. Harry coughed a few times, trying to calm his nerves. "It's badly damaged. I'm not sure." Under the encouragement of Professors Blaine and Lupin, Harry emptied the contents of the cloth bag onto the desk. "Oh my!" Professor Lupin exclaimed softly, though not with much surprise. He looked at the splintered remains and sighed. "The Homping Willow was planted the year I arrived at Hogwarts. Many young wizards were curious and tried to touch it. A boy named David Jen nearly lost an eye, and the school prohibited us from getting close. Honestly, no broom could withstand it." Harry felt a pang of sympathy, but quickly noticed Professor Blaine standing up. He bent down, carefully pinching a piece of the broom handle between his index fingers. Harry held his breath, his blue eyes filled with hope. The room was filled with a palpable sense of anticipation. Silence enveloped the office, so much so that even the faintest sound of a match striking could barely be heard. After a moment, Atticus Blaine picked up another fragment of debris with his free hand, comparing it to the piece he already held. He studied the intricate magical pathways within the broom, invisible to the untrained eye. After a long pause, Atticus carefully aligned the two diamond-shaped wooden fragments, fitting them together seamlessly. He placed them in front of him, shook his wand from his sleeve, and muttered an incantation. Under Harry's astonished gaze, a soft, fluorescent light began to flow through the cracks, binding the pieces together completely. "Success!" Harry exclaimed, his voice filled with relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Incredible," Remus Lupin remarked, his expression mirroring Harry's surprise. "You can really repair Harry's broom, Atticus. As far as I know, broomsticks are highly sophisticated alchemical artifacts, especially the Nimbus series, which contains at least 1,000 intricate magical pathways." "It's not that simple," Atticus interjected quickly, silencing Lupin and freezing the surprise on Harry's face. Back to the original. With a newfound understanding, Atticus pointed his wand at a small pile of sawdust on the table and uttered a clear command. A hazy stream of air shot from the tip of his ebony wand, lifting the wood particles into the air. Amidst the occasional spark, the scattered wood chips found their places and adhered together. Before long, a complete Nimbus 2000 hovered before them. It worked. Watching the Nimbus 2000 float gently in midair, wrapped in a faint current, Harry's heart swelled with joy. "Your proficiency in alchemy is astonishing, Atticus. Remus Lupin said, still catching his breath. Atticus remained silent, reaching out to take hold of the broom. His focused gaze followed his thumb as it traced the handle, as if he were examining something only he could see. Probably the only way to. Atticus began, but then paused, his tone tinged with regret. Seeing Harry's elated expression, he continued calmly. Don't get too excited, Harry. I haven't fully repaired your broom. But? Harry started to protest, but Atticus waved his hand, signaling for silence. As Professor Lupin mentioned, the internal structure of most alchemical items is incredibly complex, with hundreds of interconnected magical pathways. Although I've managed to weld most of the pathways inside this broom, without the original blueprints, the areas that suffered destructive damage remain problematic. Lupin nodded in understanding, though Harry still looked puzzled. This was a prime example of why the same spell could yield vastly different results depending on the wizard. In the magical world, over 99% of wizards know the standard spells they use daily, but few understand the underlying principles. Magic, much like Muggle science, adheres to a set of strict logical rules. In other words, Atticus explained patiently, if you want to use this broom for a leisurely ride on the lawn, chasing butterflies or the like, it should be fine. The steering might be a bit stiff, but if you're planning on engaging in a high-intensity Quidditch match, Harry, I suggest you carry a parachute onto the field. End of this chapter. Chapter 222. Coach, I want to learn the Patronus. Harry understood what Professor Blaine meant. Although his broom appeared repaired, it was actually severely damaged internally. He could keep it as a memento, but using it again for a Quidditch match was out of the question unless he wanted to invite disaster. Thank you, Professor. That's good enough, Harry said, taking his nimbus, which had to be retired prematurely. His voice carried an unmistakable note of disappointment. Seeing Harry, whose features bore an uncanny resemblance to James, in such a state of despair, a shadow crossed Lupin's pale cheeks. His lips twitched slightly, but considering his empty wallet, he remained silent. Well? After a moment of contemplation, Atticus Blaine turned and walked towards the suitcase next to the camp bed. After rummaging through it for a while, he pulled out a broomstick under Harry's surprised gaze. As a Quidditch expert, Harry immediately recognized it as a sweeping 7 stars. However, this broom looked as if it had been through a lot. The handle was pitted, and a small section of the tail was charred, as if scorched by fire. Anyway, Atticus handed the broom to the slightly bewildered Harry. You lost your beloved broom because of the Dementors, and I feel somewhat responsible. Until you get a new broom, you can use mine. I've modified this sweeping 7 stars. It can accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 9 seconds and has strong endurance, capable of cruising at top speed for over 2 hours. Of course, to achieve this, I had to sacrifice some of the broom's steering flexibility at high speeds so it might not handle as precisely. This unexpected gesture was a pleasant surprise. Before coming here tonight, Harry hadn't imagined he'd leave with a broom for emergencies. He looked sadly at his nimbus, which could no longer race across the field, and then turned his attention to Professor Blaine's broom. In the Quidditch world, before the Nimbus series emerged, the Sweep series was the undisputed favorite. Most of the Gryffindor team used either Sweep or Comet 260. Playing with this broom wouldn't hold Gryffindor back. However, Professor Blaine's casual attitude towards the broomstick was evident. It seemed as though it had never been maintained. If Wood knew any of his team members treated their equipment so roughly, he'd likely have them hanging from the goalposts. The Dementors. Why, Professor? Harry suddenly asked, his head lowered as he stroked the broomstick. He hesitated between Professor Lupin and Professor Blaine, but ultimately looked at Professor Blaine, who was sitting with his legs crossed behind the desk. Why? Why do they affect me the same way they did on the train, and now again? Could it be? It has nothing to do with weakness, Harry, Lupin interjected, his heart aching as he answered on Blaine's behalf. Dementors have a greater influence on you because your past experiences hold fears that others don't have. While Lupin spoke about the Dementors, Atticus's eyes once again fell on the famous lightning scar on Harry's forehead, partially hidden by a strand of hair. To be honest, before his conversation with Dumbledore, Atticus had no particular interest in Harry's scar. Who would have thought that Voldemort's precious soul resided in it? This was already the third Horcrux he had encountered. The diadem was destroyed by Atticus with fiendfire, and the Horcrux Voldemort first created last semester was likely not as perfect. For what he might do in the future, Atticus had dismembered it and extracted some key sentiments. As for Harry, although he isn't entirely clear about Dumbledore's plan, Atticus Blaine has a hunch that Dumbledore will devise a way for Voldemort to knowingly destroy this Horcrux himself. Atticus sighed inwardly. Long ago, when he first discovered he had traveled to the magical world of Harry Potter and entered Hogwarts, he never considered defeating the Dark Lord as his life's ambition or a task he must undertake. However, due to various circumstances, it seems he now has no choice but to confront Voldemort to the end. Gazing at Harry's youthful face across from him, Atticus suddenly realized a problem. He doesn't know how Dumbledore orchestrated Harry's victory over Voldemort in the original story. Perhaps Dumbledore personally guided or encouraged Harry to destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes one by one, ultimately leading Voldemort to unwittingly destroy the part of his soul within Harry. This must have been a meticulously crafted and perilous plan at every stage. Yet, given his own position, Dumbledore doesn't necessarily need to take such a risky approach. In terms of both age and potential, Atticus possesses advantages that Voldemort cannot match. As long as all the Horcruxes are destroyed, Atticus and Dumbledore, working together, are confident they could send Voldemort to Nurmengard to join Gellert Grindelwald as a prisoner. Dumbledore clearly has plans in this regard, otherwise he wouldn't have revealed to him that Harry is a Horcrux. But the future may not be as straightforward as it seems. About this, Harry, I'm not an expert. You can consult Professor Blaine. Atticus, lost in thoughts of a possible future confrontation, was brought back to reality when he heard Remus mention his name. He noticed Harry and Remus looking at him expectantly. After a moment of reflection, he understood what he had missed. You want to learn the Patronus charm? Atticus raised an eyebrow, unsurprised. Can you teach me, Professor? Harry asked, his eyes shining with determination. I want to be stronger in front of the Dementors. You'd better do it, Remus, Atticus suggested to Lupin after some thought. My Patronus has some issues, and frequent use of the Patronus charm might exacerbate them. Until I understand the situation better, I want to avoid it as much as possible. Of course, if you need my help during the teaching process, I have no objections. Then let's do it, Lupin agreed readily. As James' best friend, he felt a certain obligation to help James' son overcome the Dementor's influence. But wait a moment, Harry, Lupin added with a hint of regret. Because of my illness, I have a backlog of work to catch up on. Having achieved both purposes of his visit to some extent, Harry left in much higher spirits. The Patronus charm isn't magic that young wizards can easily master. Do you think Harry can learn it? Remus asked, standing at the door and watching Harry leave, his voice tinged with doubt. I don't think it will be a problem. The key to mastering this spell is having a strong will. In that regard, Harry is no less capable than a fully trained adult wizard, Atticus replied casually. Then, as if struck by a sudden thought, he chuckled to himself and added something that left Remus puzzled. Is there any protagonist who doesn't have a bit of luck on their side? End of this chapter. Chapter 223, Blocking the Gun. In the weeks following the Quidditch match, life at Hogwarts was relatively uneventful. The only significant event was Professor Atticus Blaine's appointment as the director of the Student Safety Office. His impressive Patronus, which he conjured on the Quidditch field, remained a hot topic of conversation. Other matters were trivial in comparison. For instance, Neville Longbottom had misplaced his wand and, despite Professor McGonagall's efforts to mobilize the entire Gryffindor boys' dormitory to search for it, the wand remained elusive. With no other options, Professor McGonagall wrote to Neville's grandmother, which resulted in Neville receiving a howler during breakfast. The stern voice of his grandmother echoed through the Great Hall, causing many students to have nightmares that night. If you can't get your father's wand back, you'll never get it back, the letter bellowed. As the hall fell silent and Neville sobbed quietly, Atticus Blaine, seated at the staff table, felt a pang of sympathy. After a moment of thought, he retrieved a spare wand from his pocket and handed it to Professor McGonagall. "Mr. Longbottom probably won't recover his wand," Atticus said gently. "I have a spare here. Please give it to him. During the Christmas holiday, he can visit Ollivander's to purchase a new one." "That's the only solution, Atticus," Professor McGonagall replied with a sigh. "I never understand why this child loses everything." "If you saw how Longbottom behaves in my class, Minerva," Snape interjected with a sneer, "you wouldn't be surprised." "The boy is excellent, Severus," Professor Lupin, looking much healthier, chimed in with a gentle smile. "He's been doing well in defense against the dark arts. He just needs encouragement." "Indeed," Professor Sprout added, "Longbottom shows great talent in herbology. You might not believe it, but I think his skills are enough to achieve excellent results in the Owls." "Perhaps you should find the reason yourself, Professor Snape," Atticus suggested with a smile, noticing Snape's darkened expression. "Speaking of which, Atticus," Professor Flitwick pointed to the wand Atticus had just produced. "As far as I know, apart from Aurors, very few wizards carry a spare wand." "It's just a personal habit," Atticus replied calmly. "You must stay away from that curse," Professor Trelawney suddenly exclaimed at the end of breakfast. Her beads jingled as she stood, peering through her thick glasses at Atticus. "My third eye tells me that darkness, death lurks near." Atticus raised an eyebrow, about to respond, but Professor McGonagall interjected coldly. "I believe you've forgotten, Sybil, that Atticus predicted his own death back in third year." Professor Trelawney, not bothering to argue, lifted her chin and walked away with an air of superiority. Aside from Neville's predicament, the students were also buzzing about the absence of their beloved headmaster. Principal Dumbledore often disappeared for short periods during the semester, only to return with a smile, dining with the faculty. However, this time, his absence stretched to 2 or 3 weeks, causing concern. The Quidditch match between Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff at the end of November ended in Ravenclaw's victory. This result greatly relieved Professor McGonagall, who had been worried about Gryffindor's chances. The victory meant Gryffindor still had a chance to reclaim their standing. After the game, as they made their way back to the castle, Professor McGonagall, Atticus Blaine, couldn't suppress the smile on his face. To be honest, even though he had been at this school for 7 years, he never knew that Professor McGonagall was such an avid fan. "Are you free tomorrow, Atticus?" Professor McGonagall asked, as she walked alongside several other professors. It seemed she had suddenly remembered something. "Would you like me to buy you a drink, Professor McGonagall?" Atticus replied with a grin. "If it's to celebrate that Gryffindor isn't out, Minerva." Professor Flitwick, who had just won a game, chimed in with a smile, trotting to keep up with the group. "I think you should join me after all, thanks to Ravenclaw's efforts." "It's not me who wants to treat you, Phileas," Professor McGonagall said, adjusting her wizard hat with a hint of irritation. "The Minister of Magic sent Albus a letter, hoping he could persuade Atticus to reinstate those Dementors from the Ministry of Magic. Albus, however, sent the letter to me unopened, so—" Atticus nodded in understanding. Fudge had likely met with Dumbledore and learned of his stance, which is why he didn't approach him directly. Dumbledore was also unwilling to act as Fudge's intermediary, especially since he didn't want Dementors at Hogwarts. "What do you think, Professor McGonagall?" Atticus asked casually. "I mean, about placing those Dementors around Hogwarts." There wasn't much to discuss on this matter. No professor wanted a group of creatures that could potentially go rogue and harm the students. Later that night, when Atticus visited Professor Snape, he received a candid suggestion. "The number of those Dementors needs to be reduced, Atticus," Snape said, looking up from the thesis he was grading. Atticus was admiring the glass specimen jars lining the wall. If so many Dementors get out of control, few at the school could manage the situation in time. "So," Atticus said, unable to resist a smirk, "do you think I should agree to keep some Dementors?" "Unless you want to make a spectacle of yourself, Atticus, I don't see why you'd want to oppose the ministry," Snape replied with a sneer. "Since our esteemed headmaster Dumbledore couldn't prevent the ministry from stationing Dementors around the school before, and he could have discussed this with Fudge, but now he's handed Fudge's letter to Minerva, asking her to arrange a meeting between you and Fudge." Can't you see, Atticus, that Dumbledore is pushing you forward? I suspect this will happen more frequently in the future. Dumbledore is likely planning to use you as the liaison between Hogwarts and the Ministry of Magic, so he doesn't have to offend anyone. Atticus clenched his fists behind his back, his tone filled with emotion. You must have endured a lot from Dumbledore to understand it so well, Professor. Snape didn't correct Atticus's phrasing. Instead, he lowered his gaze to the thesis on psychedelic drugs on the table. After a moment, he said irritably, Draco's grades have plummeted since you punished him by making him clean the owl shack. Look at this pile of rubbish, Atticus. I almost mistook it for Longbottom's homework. Punish Draco? Atticus thought, stepping closer to examine the papers on the table with a look of distaste. The punishment for Draco must have been a result of the Slytherin students blaming him for losing the game, leading to his exclusion. I've always felt that the kids in our house can be a bit unkind, Atticus remarked, smacking his lips. Do you need me to talk to Draco? You know Slytherin, Atticus, Professor Snape replied, dipping his quill into the inkwell with a cold demeanor. He must rely on his own strength to overcome his current predicament. If you intervene, his situation will only worsen. Chapter 224. Next year's activities. The first day of December fell on a weekend. Atticus Blaine opened the curtains to find that the persistent drizzle, which had been falling for nearly half a month, had finally ceased. The sky had cleared, revealing a bright, egg-white hue. However, the temperature had dropped sharply, and the muddy ground was now covered with a layer of hoarfrost. Today was a special day, as it was the weekend trip to Hogsmeade. Consequently, the school hall was sparsely populated. As Atticus sat down for breakfast, the first snow of '93 began to fall quietly. Harry and I have an appointment to practice the Patronus charm this afternoon, Lupin mentioned to Atticus at the nearly empty staff table. Would you like to join us? Today? Atticus frowned, muttering, Isn't Harry going to Hogsmeade with his friends? He didn't get his guardian's signature, Lupin replied, his eyes flickering momentarily before he smiled. I'm using a boggart to help Harry practice the spell, and he's starting to show some improvement. At this rate, I believe Harry might successfully master the Patronus charm by the end of the school year. For a third-year wizard to even approach mastering the Patronus charm, a high-level white magic, after only a few practices was indeed impressive. However, Atticus wasn't too surprised. As he had noted before, the protagonist always seems to have a bit of a halo. No, Remus, Atticus said, setting his silver spoon and rubbing his hands together. I'm heading to Hogsmeade with Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick this afternoon to discuss the Dementors with the Minister of Magic. Lupin nodded, having heard about the meeting, and said no more. Throughout the morning, Atticus remained indoors, enjoying the warmth of his office. He read books and newspapers, sipped tea, and occasionally stood to gaze at the serene, snow-covered world outside his window. Why, he mused aloud, staring at the snow-blanketed playground, do I feel like I've entered retirement early? In truth, it wasn't just a feeling. When considering the combined age of his past and present lives, Atticus realized he was indeed past retirement age. With the new dormitory building at the orphanage completed, and his magical abilities having transitioned from rapid development to a more steady, enduring phase, the cozy atmosphere of Hogwarts had recently made him feel quite lazy. Come on, Mr. Black, Atticus muttered to himself as he changed into his robe. I only failed once, and now I'm giving up? By the time Atticus reached the foyer, Professors McGonagall and Flitwick had been waiting for a while. He assisted them down the slippery, luxurious marble stairs, where they could barely make out the stone path leading to the school gate. On the lawn near the Black Lake, Ginny, Colin, and some younger wizards were engaged in a lively snowball fight, their laughter adding a touch of cheer to the quiet world. As the trio walked further, Atticus, with his keen eyes, spotted Hagrid dragging a massive fir tree toward his cabin. It dawned on Atticus that Christmas was approaching. Hey, Hagrid! Atticus called out, waving his arms. Care to join us in Hogsmeade for a drink or two? Oh, I wish I could! Hagrid bellowed happily, his moleskin coat covered in a thick layer of snow as he recognized who was calling him. Hogsmeade was already embracing a festive atmosphere. The thatched cottages and shops were blanketed with fresh snow, their doors adorned with holly wreaths, and trees decorated with strings of enchanted candles. In addition to the Hogwarts students, local residents and children added to the lively scene. Children not yet of school age darted through the bustling streets, and the entire ancient village was enveloped in a festive spirit. A prominent figure in the wizarding world, the renowned Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, stood beneath a Christmas tree that had yet to be adorned with lights. Wrapped in a pinstriped cloak, he shivered from the cold. Upon seeing the four Hogwarts professors approaching, his chubby face tinged blue from the chill, flushed with warmth. "It's been a while since I last saw you," he exclaimed. "Indeed it has," replied Atticus Blaine, stepping forward quickly to shake Fudge's outstretched hand with a smile. "How have things been recently, Mr. Minister?" "Don't even ask," Fudge began, ready to vent his frustrations, but a sharp gust of wind interrupted him. Professor McGonagall, slender and not well suited to the cold, interjected, "Let's continue this conversation elsewhere, Cornelius, unless you want us all to freeze out here." The group made their way past the post office and Zuko's joke shop, heading towards the Three Broomsticks Inn. Along the way, many students greeted them, and several villagers recognized the Minister of Magic, bowing respectfully to Fudge. "Oh," Fudge remarked happily after acknowledging a few villagers, "it seems they're enjoying their peaceful lives, aren't they?" "You're right, Minister," Hagrid replied earnestly. Since Professor Blaine imprisoned the Dementors that were wandering nearby, the villagers' enthusiasm for life has really picked up. Fudge was momentarily speechless with embarrassment, while Atticus gave Hagrid an approving nod and assisted Professor McGonagall, who was shivering. Despite Hogwarts being a training ground for magical elites, the Minister of Magic held considerable prestige elsewhere. As they pushed open the door to the Three Broomsticks Inn, they found it bustling with activity. The charming Madame Rosmerta immediately set aside her tasks and approached them warmly. "What brings you here, Minister?" she asked, directing them to a private room enclosed by wooden fences. "We have some business to discuss. Could you get us something to drink first, dear?" Fudge requested, glancing at Atticus, who remained smiling and silent. Everyone ordered alcoholic drinks, except for Atticus, who preferred to keep a clear head outside of mealtimes. "Just a cup of green tea," he requested from Madame Rosmerta. She expedited their order, and within 2 minutes their drinks were served. As they sipped their beverages, the conversation flowed casually, though Fudge appeared distracted. "I thought you'd come sooner," Atticus remarked. "After I secured those Dementors from the Ministry of Magic, I expected you'd arrive right away." "That's what I intended, Atticus," Fudge replied awkwardly, but something more pressing held me back. This revelation surprised the Hogwarts faculty, as it seemed there were matters more urgent than capturing Sirius Black. "An event is likely to take place next year," Fudge announced with a hint of superiority in his voice. "Don't ask for details, everyone. The project is still in the planning stages, and the Ministry of Magic must maintain strict confidentiality. What I can share is that Dumbledore and I have been actively working to ensure its success. Recently, we persuaded a certain party in the International Confederation of Wizards to host the event here in the UK. The professors exchanged intrigued glances, eager to learn more about this mysterious event. The two exchanged glances, and finally, Professor Flitwick spoke sharply. "If you're referring to the World Cup, Minister." "It has nothing to do with that, Phileas. Yes." "Oh, never mind. News will be out in a few months, and I assure you, it will surprise you." Chapter 225. You Are Lucky. The heavy snow fell like goose feathers, blanketing the world in a misty shroud. The cold north wind cut through the air like a knife. Each time someone entered or exited the bar, the gusts of icy wind that rushed in through the door elicited a chorus of shivers and gasps from the patrons. It was a rare occasion for Fudge to display the decorum expected of a high-ranking official of the Ministry of Magic. Despite Professor Flitwick and Hagrid's attempts to pry information from him, he remained tight-lipped, refusing to divulge any secrets. Then why mention it at all? Atticus Blaine thought, rolling his eyes. Was it merely to flaunt his superiority? "I believe you've heard the concerns of the people, Mr. Minister." Politicians like Fudge could engage in endless small talk if you didn't address the core issues directly. Atticus had no desire to spend the entire afternoon sparring with Fudge over the art of conversation. So, after the topic of mysterious activities had been exhausted, he cut to the chase. Mr. Minister, I've heard from Headmaster Dumbledore that the Ministry of Magic has pledged to ensure that the Dementors will not invade Hogwarts and disrupt the students' education and daily lives unless they capture Black. But as you can see, Atticus spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. Reality often falls short of our expectations. Yes, yes. Under the watchful eyes of several professors, Fudge instinctively reached to wipe his forehead. Realizing he wasn't speaking to Dumbledore, he awkwardly picked up his glass and took a sip of red currant rum to steady his nerves. Oh well, another tough situation, he thought, glancing at Atticus's ancient and serene lavender eyes. Fudge had mistakenly assumed that Atticus would be an ally to the Ministry of Magic, given their previous encounters. The negotiation regarding the presence of Dementors was straightforward. Atticus and Professor McGonagall's main request was simple: to control the number of Dementors and ensure they rotated shifts. This measure would effectively prevent any starving Dementors from storming into Hogwarts. Fudge agreed to this readily. The Ministry's Dementors were only part of the equation. Atticus and his magical monitoring device also provided some reassurance. As they discussed the Dementor issue, more students entered the bar, filling it with noise. Additionally, there seemed to be a problem with the kettle on the fireplace shelf. A burst of hot water spilled into the flames, causing the entire bar to become smoky. Well, where is Dumbledore? Atticus inquired after the discussion about the Dementors had concluded, shifting the focus to Dumbledore's whereabouts. I can't answer that for you. Fudge, now slightly inebriated, slurred his words. Dumbledore wrote me a letter before leaving Hogwarts, saying he needed to go out. Upon hearing the news, I immediately sought him out. He can't leave me to handle the endless questions at the International Confederation of Wizards alone. Fudge's reluctance to reveal anything was intriguing. While Professor McGonagall remained reserved, Professor Flitwick and Hagrid continued their attempts to extract information. Fudge was well aware that if he let anything slip, by the next evening, even the centaurs in the Forbidden Forest would have caught wind of it. So he merely smiled and deflected, refusing to disclose any details. Atticus didn't engage further in the conversation. At some point, his expression turned peculiar, and he seemed distracted. His gaze drifted away from the people he was conversing with, occasionally glancing in a particular direction outside. It seems that the Dementors are still needed to guard the school gate. Recently, Atticus Blaine sensed that Harry, whom he had marked, appeared in Hogsmeade, entering the range of his perception. Harry lingered in one spot for a few minutes before quickly moving toward him. As he neared the three broomsticks, Atticus also detected two familiar magical presences accompanying him. Sorry, everyone. Atticus interrupted Hagrid, who was awkwardly trying to ask if Fudge and the officials from the Hazardous Creatures Committee could spare Buckbeak. Ms. Rosmerta's tea might not be very fresh. Please excuse me for a moment. With that, he stood up and swiftly made his way to the inner room. Jingle bell. The rapid sound of wind chimes accompanied the bar door as it swung open again. Two heads quickly peeked through the crack. The lingering smoke made the already dim bar even gloomier. Harry, looking around with great interest, tried his best to avoid bumping into the bustling crowd. Unable to reveal themselves openly, the trio chose a secluded spot between the window and a beautifully decorated Christmas tree. It's so lively here, Harry exclaimed cheerfully, sitting next to Hermione as Ron went to fetch their drinks. I don't think anyone will notice me, don't you think, Hermione? No way, Harry, Hermione replied bluntly. You're taking a huge risk. I won't let you take off the invisibility cloak. I didn't plan to, Hermione, Harry retorted, slightly annoyed. But his attention was soon captured by the steaming butterbeer on the table of several older students nearby. He had only tasted this delicious drink once before, last semester, when Fred and George had brought it for everyone after they defeated the Infernal in Professor Brain's class. 2 minutes later, Ron returned with 3 identical glasses of butterbeer. However, as he passed a certain spot, his hurried steps faltered, and his happy expression turned to panic. "What's the matter, Ron?" Harry asked, puzzled by Ron's sudden change. "The professors are right there, Harry. Get down and don't let yourself be seen," Ron urged. Harry's body reacted faster than his mind. Hearing Ron's warning, his instincts drove him to slide off the stool. Ron, unable to see Harry's movements, stood there awkwardly, using his body to block any potential line of sight from that direction. "I told you so," Hermione whispered angrily. "I had a feeling something might go wrong. When I get that feeling, things usually do." "Don't make such a fuss, Hermione," Ron said, his heart rate slowing as he sat down. "They can't see Harry, can they?" With Ron's reminder, Hermione and Harry finally noticed the Minister of Magic and several professors seated not far from them. Among them was the head of Gryffindor House, whom Harry most feared encountering. "You're lucky, Harry," Hermione said, pulling out her wand and whispering apparition to the Christmas tree, enhancing its ability to shield Harry from view under the table. "Be glad Professor Blaine isn't here. Your invisibility cloak can't hide you from his sharp eyes." Harry thought to himself that he hadn't experienced anything this thrilling in a while. Just then, a pair of shiny turquoise high-heeled shoes appeared in his line of sight. The owner of the shoes stepped on the pinstriped cloak trailing behind the Minister of Magic and said with a coquettish smile, "Need more, Minister?" "Dear," exclaimed Fudge, unable to control the volume of his voice. "I just returned from Paris, and tomorrow I must dive back into endless work. It's rare for me to have any free time." "Great men are always so busy," replied Madame Rosmerta, as she poured Fudge another full glass. "By the way, is there any news from the Ministry? I mean, regarding the hunt for Blake." End of this chapter. Chapter 226, Untitled. In the Three Broomsticks bar, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were not the only ones eavesdropping on the conversation between Fudge and several Hogwarts staff members. The students seated nearby were also listening intently. Some of them had relatives in important positions within the Ministry of Magic, and those who were already privy to the information remained silent. Meanwhile, the younger wizards, who were hearing these things for the first time, tried to keep quiet, though their open mouths betrayed their curiosity. Atticus Blaine stood right behind Hermione, using a small trick to remain unseen. He watched Ron and Hermione with a condescending gaze, his expression shifting from astonishment to silence. Under the table, Harry's green eyes were filled with unforgettable hatred, and Atticus sighed inwardly. Fate, it seemed, had an incredible inertia. Despite Atticus's presence altering many things invisibly, some events continued on their original path. Harry had finally learned the truth about his parents' murder. As Professor McGonagall and the others finished discussing Black, Atticus pondered for a moment. He deftly maneuvered through the crowd, returning to the bar as if nothing had happened. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Harry's subtly changing expression and the frozen breaths of Hermione and Ron upon realizing his presence. Atticus smiled, walked back to his seat, but did not sit down. Instead, he handed the bottle containing the Dementor directly to Fudge. "I'm sorry, everyone," he said. "I just remembered that the house I rented in the village hasn't been cleaned for a while. I need to take care of it before Christmas." With that, Atticus left the Three Broomsticks. In the span of just 1 or 2 hours, the path between Hogsmeade and Hogwarts had been blanketed with nearly a foot of snow. It wasn't too late, and few of the young wizards in Hogsmeade had returned home for the weekend. Atticus trudged through the snow alone, contemplating what he would say if Harry later asked him about his parents. He considered how to tactfully explain things to him. "Everything is going well at school, Professor Blaine." Filch, the loyal Hogwarts castle administrator, sniffed and said respectfully when asked if there were any issues. Although the 1,000-year-old castle still appeared majestic, years of erosion had left many parts in disrepair. The substantial funds required for daily teaching left little for castle maintenance. Consequently, during winter, the corridors often leaked cold air, making the temperature inside not much different from outside. Though powerful wizards were not overly affected by the cold, Atticus, having just walked in the open air, felt a bit stiff in his hands and feet. He decided to cancel his plan to visit Remus to inquire about Harry's studies. Instead, he snapped his fingers to ignite the fireplace, warming his hands while casually observing the monitoring screens on the wall. The cold weather had driven most of the young wizards back to their lounges, except for the fifth-grade students in the library preparing for their high school entrance examination. On the top floor of the West Tower, Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle emerged from the dim owlery, their expressions somewhat stiff. Atticus silently watched them descend the tower and pass through the corridors. Atticus Blaine navigated the armor-lined corridor, finally entering the Slytherin basement through the passage on the opposite side of the first-floor foyer. "It's been so long, and you still haven't gotten out of trouble?" Atticus murmured to himself, a hint of curiosity in his voice. He hesitated for a moment, recalling Professor Snape's warning, and decided not to intervene for the time being. Things were not unfolding as he had anticipated. He had expected that once Harry learned the truth about his parents' deaths at the hands of Black, he would immediately return to the castle, eager to confront the truth. Yet, Harry had not done so. For several days, wherever Harry went, he wore a sullen expression. Another week passed, leaving only 2 weeks before the semester's end. Despite Dumbledore's absence, the school was abuzz with the growing Christmas spirit. Professor Flitwick, who taught charms, had adorned his classroom with colorful lights that transformed into real fairies, their wings fluttering as they danced around the room. For reasons unknown, Hagrid had requested a few days' leave, coinciding with Professor McGonagall's absence. Consequently, the task of creating a festive atmosphere in the Great Hall fell to Atticus. Filch could have been enlisted, but his lack of magical finesse often resulted in less than tidy work. As the holidays approached, the professors aimed to let students unwind before Christmas. On a Friday night, with little homework to occupy them, the younger students roamed the castle, causing mischief. At one point, dung bombs were hurled in a bathroom on a certain floor. Elsewhere, a young wizard who had provoked Peeves found himself trapped in a suit of armor. Meanwhile, a first-year student unfamiliar with the castle's shifting staircases misstepped and broke his arm. Throughout the night, Filch's furious shouts echoed through the main castle of Hogwarts. To avoid Filch's frequent intrusions into his office, Atticus sought refuge in the seldom-visited library. There, he unexpectedly discovered 3 students buried in a mountain of books. "That's unusual," Atticus remarked, clicking his tongue. "I wouldn't be surprised to see Miss Granger here alone, but all 3 of you together?" "It's for Hagrid, Professor Blaine," Hermione explained. Since Atticus was no longer the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, he saw these students less frequently, especially Hermione and Ron. Apart from occasional greetings, it had been a month or 2 since they had a proper conversation with Professor Blaine. Consequently, Hermione and Ron appeared somewhat reserved in response to his inquiry. The Ministry of Magic has decided to formally accept Lucius Malfoy's lawsuit. The court date is set for April next year. "We want to help him," Hermione said, her eyes red with emotion. Atticus could see the sadness in her gaze, understanding that she likely felt guilty for not being more attentive to Hagrid's current predicament. So that was the reason. No wonder Hagrid had seemed downcast when he requested leave. Atticus had asked him a few questions, but Hagrid had been reluctant to share, probably to avoid causing trouble for himself. "So, you're trying to help Hagrid prepare a defense?" Atticus asked, glancing at the dusty files. After receiving an affirmative response, he nodded. "Hagrid should be grateful to have friends like you who truly care about him." With that, Atticus moved past them, heading toward the restricted section. Ron whispered a reminder to Hermione to keep quiet, but Hermione was clearly not inclined to do so. A bit dissatisfied with Professor Blaine's understatement, she glared at him with righteous indignation. She was on the verge of questioning him about his apparent indifference towards his subordinates when suddenly Harry spoke up, his voice cutting through the tension. "Professor Blaine!" Atticus Blaine raised an eyebrow and turned around slowly, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "What is it, Potter? What's the matter?" "You know about those things, don't you?" Harry pressed on, ignoring the silent pleas from Ron and Hermione, who were frantically signaling him to stop. The flickering torchlight on the walls danced in his green eyes as he took a deep breath and continued. "I mean, my parents died at the hands of Voldemort because of Black's betrayal. You always knew that, right? because you've been hunting down that filthy traitor." The library wasn't empty. A young wizard, startled by Harry's mention of Voldemort's name, slipped off his stool in fright and sat on the floor, staring in horror. "Let's discuss this in my office," Atticus sighed, his voice calm yet firm. End of this chapter. Chapter 227. Where's Your Courage? Atticus Blaine led Hermione, Ron, and a now calmed Harry through the corridors adorned with ribbons of holly and mistletoe. The cold wind had a soothing effect on Harry's earlier agitation. Atticus spoke to the three young wizards with enthusiasm, explaining that the festive decorations were his handiwork. The trio followed Professor Blaine into his office on the third floor. Unlike other students, they were quite familiar with this place. The office hadn't changed much, except for a new set of sofas and a coffee table near the door, which made the room feel less bare. Outside, snowflakes drifted down like dandelion seeds, and the temperature had been steadily dropping for a week. The surface of the vast black lake was already dotted with icicles and threatened to freeze over completely in a few days. "Let's get straight to the point, Harry," Atticus said, gesturing for them to sit. He flicked his wand to ignite the fireplace, then settled onto a sofa by the wall. "Are you upset with me for not telling you the truth?" Ron and Hermione sat beside Harry. Under Professor Blaine's watchful gaze, they refrained from fidgeting, though they silently urged Harry to remain calm. Despite knowing that Professor Blaine wasn't responsible for his parents' deaths, Harry felt a surge of anger at the directness of the question. His body heated with emotion as he looked up to meet Professor Blaine's dark eyes. "My parents died at the hands of his best friend," Harry said, his voice rising. "And now that person wants to attack Hogwarts and kill everyone. Yet Professor Dumbledore, McGonagall, Hagrid, the Ministry of Magic, and you all think I don't need to know this." "Harry," Hermione whispered urgently, but Harry ignored her. "You know what I hear when a Dementor is near me, Professor," Harry continued, his voice trembling with emotion. "I hear my mother screaming, begging Voldemort. She's not pleading for her own life. She's begging him to spare me. And they ended up like this because of a mistaken belief." "Harry, we've talked about this in private," Ron interjected, summoning his courage. "Black will face justice, I promise." Hermione was already in tears. Harry's words came out in a near roar. He expected Professor Blaine to defend himself, to offer some lofty explanation or comforting words like Hermione and Ron had. But instead, Professor Blaine simply regarded him with stern eyes. "If I understand you correctly," Atticus said, his tone icy, reminiscent of his days as the Golden Viper, "you want to kill Black with your own hands, don't you?" Ron had asked this before, and Hermione had interrupted Harry before he could answer. Now, faced with the question again, Harry's anger flared. Ignoring Hermione's quiet pleas, he replied defiantly, "Yes, Professor, if I can do that." Atticus laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. He nodded slightly at Harry's ignorance. "Even if you know you won't be a match for Black? Even if you know your reckless actions would render your parents' sacrifices meaningless and cost you your life?" Harry's resolve wavered for a moment, but he held firm. "At the very least, my parents wouldn't want their son to be a coward." "Very good." Atticus stood, his expression unreadable. A palpable sense of pressure filled the room. Emanating from Atticus Blaine had enveloped the entire room, creating an atmosphere so tense that even the flames in the fireplace flickered under its oppressive weight. The once warm room now felt as cold as a winter's night. Atticus leaned forward slightly, a movement so subtle yet powerful that it sent shivers down Ron and Hermione's spines, their hair standing on end from the static charge in the air. In their minds, they envisioned a monstrous dragon, its wings casting a shadow over everything, its head lowered menacingly. "Don't want," Hermione whispered weakly, tears streaming down her face. She feared that Harry's actions had provoked Professor Blaine beyond reason, and she realized that, aside from Headmaster Dumbledore, there might be a one in the wizarding world capable of standing against him. The thought that Blaine might actually harm Harry was terrifying. What could she do to stop it? Ron appeared on the verge of fainting, and Harry was visibly shaken by Professor Blaine's wrath. Only Hermione seemed capable of thinking clearly in the midst of the chaos. Her mind raced to the time turner, the magical device that could allow her to travel back and prevent them from visiting the library that night, or perhaps warn Professor McGonagall of the impending danger. She knew the risks of altering time, but it seemed the only option to prevent the unthinkable. With determination, Hermione raised her trembling hand, but Atticus's icy gaze froze her in place, chilling her to the core. Her body quivered, and even her breath seemed to halt. Atticus lifted his right arm, the wand in his hand pointing towards the fireplace. The flames danced wildly, and from the embers, a dagger materialized, landing in his grasp. Another ember transformed midair, revealing a figure that sent a wave of dread through Harry, Hermione, and Ron. It was Sirius Black. His face, etched into their memories from Muggle news and Wizarding Wanted posters, was unmistakable. Gaunt and disheveled, his hair matted and his teeth stained, he wore the tattered prison garb of Azkaban. His emaciated frame was a testament to his time in captivity. Black took the dagger from Atticus and circled the coffee table, approaching Harry with a predatory gleam in his eyes. He flipped the dagger, pointing it towards himself, and extended it to Harry, his lips curling into a sinister grin reminiscent of Peeves. "If you want to avenge your parents, Potter." Black's voice was a raspy whisper, like the sound of dry leaves crushed underfoot. "Then kill me, Potter. Just take this dagger and drive it into my neck." Harry recoiled instinctively, forgetting the sofa behind him, and collapsed onto it, his eyes wide with fear that eclipsed his anger. "Plunge this dagger into my neck, Potter, and let my blood stain you. I'm waiting." "No," Harry muttered, retreating further, his head shaking in denial, his face as pale as the snow outside. "Come on, Professor!" Hermione cried, her voice breaking as she covered her face, unable to watch Black's advance towards Harry. The murderous aura that had filled the room seemed to reach its peak, suffocating them all. In the office, the shadows vanished, and the embers in the fireplace flickered back to life. The warmth swiftly chased away the cold, making the entire room feel brighter and more inviting. The mysterious Black and the dagger silently crumbled into a few wisps of ash, drifting gently to the floor. Atticus Blaine tilted his head and glanced at Harry, who stood there, dumbfounded. With a smile, Atticus asked, "Where's your courage, Harry?" End of this chapter. Chapter 228, The Secret Path. "Where's your courage, Potter?" Professor Blaine's words hung in the air, and Hermione exhaled deeply, feeling as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her entire being seemed to come alive with relief. She finally understood that Professor Blaine had no intention of harming them. He was merely educating Harry in his own unique way. Harry, too, realized this. His dry, pale lips moved silently, unable to form words, as he looked utterly devastated. "Where's my courage?" he asked himself. He had believed that his hatred for Black would drive him to take a life, but he found he wasn't as brave as he had imagined. He didn't even have the courage to harm a mere imitation of Black. "Sorry, Harry, I misled you," Professor Blaine said with a smile, his words leaving Harry stunned. Harry stared blankly at the powerful young professor before him, unable to comprehend why he had said that. Professor Blaine seemed to have taught him a lesson, and he had succeeded. "I suppose you're resenting yourself for being a cowardly little wizard who can't even bring himself to destroy a dummy." Atticus Blaine's sharp gaze pierced Harry's heart. "But in truth, I misled you. Taking a life is never about courage, Harry." Hearing this, Harry's blue eyes flickered with a hint of anger. Atticus glanced at the three young wizards, who appeared bewildered, and spoke in a calm, unwavering voice. "It wasn't cowardice that stopped you from destroying that dummy. It was kindness, Harry. You, Hermione, and Ron are all kind-hearted wizards. You don't wish to deprive others of their lives. Even when it comes to a dark wizard like Black, who has wronged you, deep down, you hope he returns to Azkaban to serve his sentence. But is there anything wrong with that, Professor Blaine?" Hermione's voice trembled, her cheeks pale. "Followers of you-know-who, those Death Eaters, have harmed so many, yet the Ministry of Magic only imprisons them in Azkaban." Hermione felt a tightness in her chest, struggling to continue, but she pressed on. "The law doesn't allow for the death penalty, Professor. It's been abolished for a long time." "The law?" Atticus sneered, ready to retort, but he paused, considering that Harry and his friends were still young, their world confined to this fairy tale castle. He shook his head. "As young wizards, who have not yet graduated, You must understand that the gap between you and an adult wizard with exceptional magical skills is vast. I recall sharing my thoughts with you before. Power is power. It's a pure thing. Neither love nor hate nor courage can make your power leap instantly. Therefore, pursuing personal revenge on Black would only waste the efforts of those who care about your well-being, including the sacrifice of your parents. The silence that followed was excruciating for Harry, but Ron, feeling relieved, offered sincere comfort. I always knew you couldn't become a murderer over something like that, Harry. Harry would never be a murderer, Hermione added nervously, fearing that Harry's words might provoke Professor Blaine. She leaned over and tightly grasped Harry's cold, sweaty hand. I will be cautious, Professor Blaine, Harry finally said, his voice hoarse as he pursed his lips tightly. So, may I assume, Professor Blaine's voice suddenly turned cheerful, that I'll never see you sneaking off to the Three Broomsticks under that magical invisibility cloak again? Did you steal a drink? Professor Blaine inquired, his eyes narrowing slightly. Hermione glared fiercely at Ron, her surprise evident, though her tone suggested otherwise. It was clear that the trio had already speculated about this in private. Oh, it's not stealing, Professor, Ron replied weakly, avoiding Hermione's piercing gaze. I paid for Harry's butterbeer. Harry felt a twinge of nervousness. During their private discussions, he had agreed with Ron. They believed that the bustling noise in the Three Broomsticks that day would have masked their actions, especially with someone wearing an invisibility cloak. Even Professor Blaine himself might not have noticed Hermione and Ron. Headmaster Dumbledore seems to have informed you, Atticus Blaine continued cautiously, that invisibility spells, cloaks, and similar methods are ineffective against Dementors. You must have noticed their presence at the school gates again. However, after discussions with the Ministry of Magic, the number of Dementors has been reduced. Therefore, you are strictly forbidden from using the invisibility cloak to sneak out of the school. As Professor Blaine spoke, the expressions of Harry, Ron, and Hermione shifted subtly. Hermione, in particular, seemed tense, as if she were trying to conceal something. Both she and Ron knew that Harry hadn't exited through the school gate, but had used Fred and George's magical map. Even without mind-reading magic, the experienced Atticus Blaine could sense the trio's unease. He narrowed his eyes and lowered his voice. Are you hiding something important? Faced with pressure, the three third-year students exchanged nervous glances. Ron and Harry lowered their heads, staring intently at the ground. Only Hermione hesitated, as if she wanted to speak. Professor, Hermione finally said, taking a deep breath under Professor Blaine's unwavering gaze. Harry, he's not. Harry and Ron looked up at Hermione, their eyes pleading with her, not to mention the map. Through her gaze, Hermione understood their silent plea. This is for your own good, Harry, she thought, returning Harry's resolute look. Actually, Harry, he accidentally discovered a secret passage while exploring the castle, Hermione explained evasively. He entered it out of curiosity and by chance found himself in Hogsmeade. Hermione's words were deliberately vague, not to protect the magical map, but to prevent Fred and George from getting into trouble. Her partial truth allowed Harry and Ron to breathe a sigh of relief, though their expressions remained tense. They knew that now, with Hermione's revelation, Professor Blaine would likely block the secret passage to prevent Black from entering. Secret passages? Atticus Blaine's expression turned serious. But Argus assured me that all 4 secret passages in the school have been sealed. I think, Harry began. Unable to remain silent under Professor Blaine's intense scrutiny, he decided to support Hermione's story. I think I must have stumbled upon a secret passage that Filch didn't know about. End of this chapter. Chapter 229, How to Know. The moment Harry mentioned he might have discovered a secret passage unknown to Filch, Atticus Blaine realized that he, Dumbledore, and everyone else at Hogwarts had made a grave mistake in their efforts to guard against Black's intrusion. On the night they returned to Hogwarts for the semester, Atticus had explicitly instructed Filch to seal off all secret passages leading from the castle to the outside world. Filch had confidently assured them that the 4 known secret passages had been completely blocked by him and the professors, leaving no possibility of entry. This assurance, however, led to a dangerous misconception. the belief that only 4 secret passages existed. In truth, Hogwarts had stood for thousands of years, and who could say how many secret passages had been constructed by mischievous students over the centuries? Perhaps Black himself had dug secret tunnels with his friends during his school days. But that seemed unlikely, as Remus, the only one of Black's close school friends still alive, would surely have known about them. Unless Black had planned this scenario long ago and kept it a secret from Remus. Professor. Both Harry and Ron glared at Hermione, who remained unrepentant. She met their eyes defiantly and addressed Professor Blaine, who was deep in thought like a statue. You think Black sneaked into Hogwarts through those secret passages, don't you? That's impossible, Hermione, Ron exclaimed, now resigned to the fact that the precious passage couldn't be kept secret. When Black sneaked into Hogwarts, Hogsmeade was full of Dementors. He couldn't have snuck into Honeyduke's underground warehouse, could he? Atticus, lost in thought, briefly glanced at Ron. These young students couldn't shake their ingrained assumptions. While it was true that Black might not have used the passage Harry had, Atticus was certain Black had access to a secret passage unknown to anyone else. This was how he managed to infiltrate Hogwarts unnoticed on Halloween night and leave quickly after failing to enter the Gryffindor common room. The situation was both frustrating and amusing. So many were concerned about Black's whereabouts, yet these 3 students had stumbled upon crucial clues. Aside from this secret passage, Harry, Atticus said, hearing the metaphorical clink of 5 galleons in his mind. He fixed Harry with a serious gaze and spoke earnestly. You have information about other secret passages. I hope you'll be truthful, Harry. After all, this concerns bringing Black to justice as soon as possible. As far as I know, Harry began, with no intention of resisting. His primary concern was preventing Professor Blaine from discovering the magical map. Not only did Harry want to keep it, but if Professor Blaine found it, he would trace its origins, implicating Fred and George and revealing how they acquired it. A total of 7, Harry admitted honestly, which relieved Hermione, who had been tense, wondering if she would need to expose Harry again if he lied. But only 1 is usable. 4 have been sealed by Mr. Filch, 1 has caved in, and the last has an entrance at the Humping Willow. No one can pass that tree alive. That's just what you think, Harry, Atticus said, contemplating before confirming. These are all the secret passages you know of, right? You're not hiding any, trying to leave an escape route for yourself? Harry could answer this question with a clear conscience. I can't believe. Harry, Hermione, and Ron knew that Professor Blaine's watchful eyes seemed to be everywhere in Hogwarts Castle. As they made their way back from the 3rd-floor office to the Gryffindor Tower, they remained silent, wary of being overheard. Once they stepped into the common room, Ron, still simmering with resentment, couldn't hold back any longer. He glared at Hermione, who had anticipated his reaction but refused to back down. You betrayed us, he accused angrily. Oh, stop yelling, Ron, Hermione retorted, her brown eyes flashing with determination. Despite the incident with Scabbers, she felt justified in her actions that night. The common room was empty, and the 3 of them sat by the fireplace, seeking warmth from the flames. Ron retrieved a bottle of butterbeer from its hiding place behind an old chest of drawers. It was contraband they had smuggled in during their last visit to Hogsmeade. Don't you see, Ron? Hermione said, pulling out her arithmancy homework and scribbling furiously, as if the words flowed without thought. Professor Blaine and I share the same concerns. We all know he won't rest tonight. He'll be checking the remaining 3 passages to see if there's any sign of a criminal passing through. In the chilly weather, cold drinks were unappealing, so Ron used his best levitation charm to float 3 glasses of butterbeer over the golden flames, warming them. This only proves one thing, he said, exasperated. Even someone as sharp as Professor Blaine can lose his head sometimes. Ron had grown weary of Hermione's domineering attitude during their debates. I'd like to see how Black managed to slip through the remaining secret passages. It can't be Honeyduke's, or we'd have attended Fred and George's funeral by now. And as for the landslide passage, with all due respect, Hermione, if Fred and George couldn't navigate it, I doubt Black could do any better. Hermione paused, her quill hovering over her parchment. She bit her lower lip before responding. There's one more possibility. If, Ron interjected, rolling his eyes in exasperation, if you and I flew to Hogwarts in a car with Harry at the start of second year, you'd know that no one could pass by the Humping Willow without leaving behind some body parts. At least Professor Blaine thinks, Hermione began, but Harry, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. The key is having a wand to do it. The butterbeer bubbled as Ron set the hot glasses on the table, or with gesturing for Harry to take one. He shot Hermione a disgruntled look. Harry's right. Black would need a wand. Don't you think Neville's wand might have caused Black to lose his? Remember, the last time Black broke into the castle, Neville's wand was left behind. Hermione was at a loss for words, her brow furrowed as she tried to counter Ron's argument. Harry, however, was exhausted, not physically, but mentally. Ever since learning the truth about Black's betrayal of his parents, he had been tormented by thoughts of revenge. He had imagined using the most ruthless means to kill Black if they ever met. But tonight, Professor Blaine had shown him that taking a life was far more complicated than he had imagined. As the conversation circled back to its starting point, Harry realized he might have been better off not knowing the truth about his parents' murder. At least then, he wouldn't be plagued by his conscience. All he could do now was find Black before the Dementors did. Yet, he knew he had to intervene before Ron and Hermione's argument escalated further. Regarding the issue with Scabbers, Atticus Blaine had always harbored internal disagreements. The fragile understanding they had painstakingly built seemed on the verge of collapse once more. I suppose I'll have to apologize to Fred and George, Harry sighed deeply, his expression somber, and remind them that the secret passage of the hunchbacked witch is no longer safe. It was past 10 o'clock in the evening, and the young wizards should have been in their dormitories long ago. To avoid being discovered by Percy, who was returning from his night watch, the trio decided to conclude this less-than-ideal evening. I can go with you, Harry, Ron offered, patting Harry on the shoulder. We can explain everything to Fred and George. They should give me some. A sudden noise from the door interrupted Ron, startling both Harry and Hermione. Professor Lupin, Harry began, confused by the usually gentle professor's serious demeanor. Professor Blaine just visited my office, Lupin said solemnly, looking directly at Harry. He explained the situation and asked me to be vigilant tonight, HT. Professor Blaine mentioned that he accidentally learned from you about some unknown secret passages leading out of the castle, Harry. How did you come to know the locations of these passages so well? Apologies for the delay. I had a hospital appointment today. Another month has passed, and I want to extend my gratitude to the gentlemen who have supported this book so far. End of this chapter. Chapter 230, Introspection. What a strange situation, Harry thought as he faced the questioning. Professor Blaine hadn't probed too deeply into how he discovered those secret passages, but Professor Lupin, upon learning about it, seemed very concerned. It was so late, yet he had come all the way to the Gryffindor common room to inquire about it. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what Professor Lupin was up to. Oh, this, Harry shrugged, trying to appear as innocent as possible. We found a few of them ourselves. That evening, Harry had already lied to two professors he was close to, but he felt he had no choice. Fred and George had kindly given him the Marauders map, and he couldn't implicate them. Lupin's gaze was sharp, a stark contrast to his usual gentle demeanor. He neither accepted nor rejected Harry's explanation, but pressed on. I suppose you must be getting a little help from something else too, Harry? Could it be that Professor Lupin knew about the map? Harry's heart raced as he considered the possibility. I'll just say it straight, Harry. Lupin wasn't one to beat around the bush. His pale cheeks were flushed by the firelight as he looked into Harry's green eyes and asked, Professor Blaine told me that the entrance to one of the 3 secret passages that Filch doesn't know about is not inside the castle, but under the Humping Willow by the playground. Please allow me to be puzzled by this, Harry. I think that under normal circumstances, you shouldn't know this, right? Ron and Hermione stood behind Professor Lupin. When Lupin asked this question and locked eyes with Harry, their eyes met in midair, and they saw the confusion mirrored in each other's expressions. Had Professor Lupin really gathered so many people just to find this out? Not because of. Harry frowned, desperately searching for an excuse to deflect the question. But Professor Lupin pressed on sternly. I suppose what you tell me must be the truth, Harry. Harry was at a loss, unable to continue fabricating lies. Because of that car, Professor. Ron mustered the courage to speak up. Facing Lupin's skeptical gaze, he said confidently, I think you may have heard about that, Professor. At the start of our second year, Harry and I flew to Hogwarts in a car. The Daily Prophet reported something about that, Lupin said slowly, a flicker of memory in his eyes. Minerva mentioned it to me a couple of times. She said your car crashed into the Homping Willow? You're a genius, Ron. Harry's eyes conveyed this sentiment, boosting Ron's confidence. His tone grew more assured. Oh yes, Professor, Ron said with a hint of exasperation. It was a very painful lesson, Professor, and Harry and I don't usually like to recall it. The car, it finally lost control and hit the Whomping Willow. You know, that tree has a bad temper. We desperately dodged, escaping its clutches at the cost of 2 broken ribs and a wand. Hermione's cheeks flushed. She wasn't comfortable with deceiving the professor, even though she had done it herself on occasion. So, you discovered the secret passage then? Lupin's frown eased slightly. Ron's explanation seemed plausible, with no glaring inconsistencies. Yes, Professor. Ron, quick-witted as ever, replied. But at that time, we were in a hurry to escape and didn't have time to explore it. We wanted to check it out later, but we couldn't get close to it again. Well, that sounds like the truth. Lupin sighed with relief, his shoulders relaxing. But before Harry could feel at ease, Lupin's demeanor turned serious once more, and he glared at Harry, saying, Professor Blaine, after practicing the Patronus charm at my place last week, you sneaked out of the school gates and went to Hogsmeade for a drink. To be honest, Harry, I was shocked. I thought the sounds you hear when the Dementors approach would have kept you more restrained. Harry tried to explain, but Lupin didn't give him the chance. Your parents sacrificed their lives to protect you, to ensure you lived, Harry. It's not right to repay them by risking their sacrifice for a couple of beers. Lupin left, and his final look of disappointment made Harry feel more uncomfortable than he had in Professor Blaine's office. Seeing him like this, Hermione opened her mouth to speak, but said nothing, though she agreed with both professors about Harry's education. As they slowly walked up the spiral staircase leading to the dormitory, Harry suddenly said in a sullen tone, I feel like I've been acting foolishly all this time. Oh, don't think that way, Harry, Ron said, patting the distraught Harry on the back. Professor Blaine and Professor Lupin are both adult wizards with life experiences we can't compare to. When they were our age, they probably did countless reckless things too. The night was dark, and a week of fine snowflakes had turned the world outside Hogsmeade into a white canvas. In a dry, cold cave, a large dog resembling a black bear lay shivering on a bed of dry grass. Beneath it was a pile of blood-stained vole bones. The swirling, harsh wind squeezed through the narrow entrance, making the dark cave echo with sounds like howling ghosts and wolves. The big black dog raised its head just in time to see a sharp black shadow leap onto a black stone at the cave's entrance, shaking the snow from its furry body. When it saw the object in Crookshank's mouth, the previously weak dog suddenly jumped up, whimpering with excitement. The biting cold and unbearable hunger left no room for questioning where Crookshanks had found it. The dog lunged at Crookshanks, viciously grabbing the frozen pie with one bite, desperately trying to eat it. Crack! In the cave filled with the howling wind, the sound of something breaking echoed. The hungry black dog spat out broken teeth and blood, along with the piece of pie Crookshanks had brought. It was Hagrid's infamous rock cake. The big black dog wanted to cry but had no tears, its face a picture of despair as it finally recognized what it was. I want to update 10 chapters on April Fool's Day. End of this chapter. Chapter 231. Crookshanks lazily stretched his body into a circle, curling up on the messy haystack. However, the temperature in the cave was too low, and the haystack beneath him offered little warmth. Dumbledore still hadn't returned to Hogwarts, which was the news Crookshanks brought today. For the large black dog, this was undoubtedly good news. Yet, the thought of another powerful wizard currently residing at Hogwarts left the black dog feeling uneasy. On the day of Harry's competition, the black dog had been under the stands on the playground and witnessed the commotion caused by the young wizard named Atticus Blaine. The spectacle had shocked the teaching staff and young wizards present, including the black dog itself. Since its last failed attempt to infiltrate Hogwarts, it had been waiting for the right moment to try again. With Dumbledore away and the Dementors no longer guarding the school gates, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. However, the enigmatic young wizard made it hesitant to act rashly. Later, it learned that Atticus Blaine had been appointed by Albus Dumbledore and the Ministry of Magic as the head of the Office of Student Security, a position created specifically for him. Until it could discern what plans Blaine had in place to capture it, the black dog was unwilling to take the risk. Another failure could mean death. While it wasn't afraid of dying, it was determined to eliminate the despicable traitor first. It had already planned to make its move during the Christmas holiday, 2 weeks away. By then, the students would leave to spend the holidays with their families, and there was a high chance that the school staff, including Atticus Blaine and Harry, would also be absent. According to its information, Harry and Ron had spent previous Christmas holidays at school. If Dumbledore hadn't returned by then, it would be a golden opportunity. As night deepened, a sharp, knife-like cold wind blew through the narrow cave entrance, making the already icy cave even colder. The black dog, with hoarfrost on its face, shivered as it contemplated its next move. Seeing the black dog trembling, Crookshanks stretched his limbs and stood up, pointing with his eyes toward a direction outside the cave entrance. Was it suggesting they escape the cold nights in the Shrieking Shack? The black dog understood Crookshanks' suggestion, but hesitated before rejecting it. The Shrieking Shack was now Atticus Blaine's experimental site, and he could return at any moment. Even in animagus form, the risk of being recognized was low, but the black dog was unwilling to risk a direct encounter. It whimpered, trying to convey its feelings to Crookshanks, who continued to point toward the Shrieking Shack and meowed softly. The professor hadn't been back for 2 months and had likely forgotten about the place. However, the village was still patrolled by Aurors and Dementors, and rushing to the Shrieking Shack could be just as dangerous. The black dog wagged and howled, taking a while for Crookshanks to understand what Aurors and Dementors meant. Those things hadn't been in that room. Crookshanks' whiskers trembled, and his amber eyes gleamed sharply. The meaning behind his next meow completely shattered the black dog's vigilance. "Stay here, and you'll freeze to death." Atticus Blaine had discovered 2 secret passages within Hogwarts Castle that Filch was unaware of. One hidden behind a mirror on the 4th floor, and the other, previously used by Harry, leading to the basement storeroom of Honeyduke's candy store. After thoroughly checking for any signs of Black having used these passages, it was already 2 o'clock in the morning. Creak, creak. The snow on the playground, cleared just the previous morning, had accumulated to a depth that reached Atticus's knees in just over 10 hours. The world resembled a frozen Muggle photograph, as cold as the surface of the moon. On the edge of the playground, the withered branches of the magical humping willow swayed wildly in the bitter cold wind. Atticus stood just outside its attack range, observing it quietly. For some reason, he had a premonition that he would discover something significant here. Hogwarts, draped in a white cloak of snow, lay in deep slumber, and Hagrid's hut at the edge of the Forbidden Forest was dimly lit. Atticus took a deep breath, feeling the chill in his lungs. This winter's temperature reminded him of the winter when he first arrived in this world. An inconspicuous buzzing sound was quickly carried away by the howling wind. Atticus waved his wand, and a magic shield, nearly indistinguishable from the snow, enveloped him. He stepped into the humping willow's attack range. Like a dragon whose territory had been invaded, the magical plant became furious. Hundreds of willow branches lashed out like whips, scattering the north wind and making crackling noises. Snowflakes danced in the air, and the surface of the white magic shield rippled like a calm lake disturbed by raindrops. Atticus slowly pulled his calf from the snow, advancing step by step, enduring the humping willow's fierce assault until he reached its thick roots. His penetrating gaze pierced through layers of snow and tangled vines, revealing a hidden hole beneath. With a flick of his wand, the frozen snow lifted gently. Atticus crouched down, carefully examining the hole's traces. The soil beneath the snow was frozen solid, and while there were no human footprints, it was covered with a jumble of cat and dog tracks. "Crookshanks and Fang?" Atticus murmured softly. The only rain in recent months had been during the last Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff match. Since then, the temperature had plummeted, and there hadn't been a warm, sunny day. This week it had snowed for several days, preserving the tracks left behind. Judging by the footprints, it seemed Black hadn't entered Hogwarts through this secret passage. However, Atticus still harbored doubts. If Fang knew about the secret passage under the Humping Willow, Hagrid must have known too, yet he never mentioned it. Regardless, Atticus decided to investigate further. He stared at the dark hole for a moment, ensuring there was no movement below, then lit his wand and conjured a gust of wind to gently lower himself down. The tunnel entrance was a smooth, dirt slope, and the ground of the connecting tunnel was dry, with no signs of rain or snow seepage. However, the tunnel was too low for a wizard of normal height, forcing Atticus to stoop as he moved through it. The dusty ground bore only the footprints of cats and dogs, with no traces of goblins or house elves. Atticus Blaine felt a twinge of disappointment, and after a brief moment of contemplation, he abandoned the idea of traversing the tunnel step by step. A gust of shadowy figures swiftly swept through the narrow, foreboding passage. Atticus, using his unique magical perspective, surveyed the tunnel and the space above it. He confirmed that the tunnel indeed stretched towards Hogsmeade. While a distance of 2 or 3 miles might take hours to cover on foot, Atticus managed to fly over it in just a few minutes. As he approached the beginning of a long, gentle slope, he transformed back into his wizard form. The exit was near, and Atticus needed to be prepared to respond swiftly to any situation that might arise. He cast several spells on himself: invisibility, breath concealment, and levitation. With these enhancements, he continued along the gentle slope. After a few minutes, he reached a sharp bend. Taking a deep breath, Atticus stepped forward, ready for whatever lay ahead. End of this chapter. Chapter 232, Hello, Mr. Black. The room was a chaotic gray space, with peeling wallpaper and stains covering the floor. Broken furniture lay scattered as if someone had smashed it in a fit of rage, and all the windows were sealed with wooden boards. Atticus Blaine found himself suspended in midair, his eyes scanning the room before his expression darkened. This was the Shrieking Shack. It took only a few seconds for Atticus to realize where he was. He had been here before, and there was no mistaking it. Gazing at the gaping black hole beneath him, Atticus rolled his eyes in exasperation. He had discovered this hole the first time he entered this haunted house. Initially, he thought it was the handiwork of Ban-de-Man. Little did he expect it to be the entrance to a secret passage leading to Hogwarts. Was this passage dug by some idle, good-for-nothing person? The fluorescent light reflecting off the white snow outside seeped into the room through the gaps in the planks, casting a pale glow on Atticus's indistinct face. He couldn't help but think angrily. The house was empty. Atticus could confirm this without even leaving the room. Unless, of course, Sirius Black was more magically adept than he was, which seemed highly unlikely. In the room filled with debris, on the silent gray floor, there were only the footprints of cats and dogs, much clearer than those in the mud under the Humping Willow. Atticus had already deduced that the cat's footprints belonged to Crookshanks, but the dog's prints were not from Hagrid's Fang. They were from the large, black stray dog he had glimpsed once before. Atticus scratched his itchy head and couldn't help but smile. How many times had Crookshanks led the dog around Hogwarts? Through his magical perspective and the warning and marking spells he had left around the house, he saw Crookshanks and the big black dog sleeping on the rotten sofa in the living room, cuddled together. Atticus realized he probably wouldn't use this house again in the future. Since he was here, he might as well clean up the traces of his previous experiments left in the house. With this thought, Atticus leaped over the fallen crystal chandelier on the floor and floated out of the first-floor bedroom like a ghost. What a massive dog, like a black bear. When Atticus's curious eyes fell on the big black dog, which seemed to be sleeping fitfully, he wondered if it had the blood of a magical creature. How else could he explain the abnormal amount of magic power in its body and its enormous size? Atticus stood 10 feet from the sofa, observing it with interest while scratching his increasingly itchy head. The darkness enveloped the shrieking shack silently, and as the delicate snowflakes approached the house, they drifted away as if disturbed. Atticus stopped scratching his head, and his previously casual gaze now held a deep, abyss-like intensity. Interesting. Staring at the big black dog, whose eyelids were constantly twitching, Atticus's mouth curled into a hint of self-mockery. Animagus, the wizarding world was indeed full of talented individuals. Godric's Hollow. At the end of summer and the beginning of autumn, billions of twinkling stars in the boundless night sky cast their bright starlight upon the earth. A gentle, warm breeze lingered on the intricate dirt roads of the village, slightly lifting the darkness that hung over the hearts of every magical resident. In a white bungalow, Sirius, wearing a brand-new sky-blue robe, his neat and smooth short hair naturally falling over his shoulders, stood in the dim candlelight that softened his sharp, heroic features. He looked at little Harry, who had just turned 1, and remarked, "I have to say, James, this kid looks almost exactly like you." In the cradle, a year-old Harry was sucking his finger, and Sirius grinned happily. "You have to grow up quickly, boy. Your father and I are still waiting for you to inherit our great adventure." Oh, Lily, standing on the other side of the cradle, heard Sirius, and her loving expression vanished. She glared at Sirius, angrily. "That's exactly what I've been worrying about, Sirius. If possible, I hope Harry will be a brave little wizard, but definitely not like you and James when you were at Hogwarts. If you're expecting Harry to be a well-behaved little wizard, my dear." A skinny man with messy hair approached from the living room with a mischievous smile. He gently stroked Lily's dark red hair and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I bet you will be disappointed." "Yes!" Lily glared at her husband, Atticus Blaine, and said, "With you and Sirius as role models, I can only imagine what Harry will be like. If possible, I hope Remus can provide him with some positive guidance." "Don't let Remus fool you, Lily," Sirius laughed heartily. "He's less honest than you think." Harry, who was sleeping soundly, let out a small cry, his mouth curling up. Lily shooed the two unreliable men into the kitchen and softly hummed a lullaby. After a while, when she joined them in the kitchen, she noticed that Atticus and Sirius wore serious expressions. "Things have been tough lately," Sirius said to Lily as she sat down. "I think you must have heard about the terrible things that happened to the Longbottoms. Voldemort is now targeting you, and he must have learned through spies how we plan to protect you. Therefore, we must ensure that nothing goes wrong." Lily immediately understood what Sirius was referring to, something they had discussed before. Atticus wholeheartedly supported Sirius's proposal because Peter was also his friend, someone he trusted with his life. "This business is always risky, Sirius," Lily said worriedly. "In my opinion, it would be more appropriate for Dumbledore to be our secret keeper. As we all know, he is the wizard Voldemort fears the most. Dumbledore is indeed reliable, but he already has so many responsibilities. We can't rely on him for everything, can we?" Atticus voiced his opinion. "Exactly," Sirius agreed, pleased with Atticus's understanding. He looked into Lily's green eyes and said, "If Dumbledore's guess is true, and there are indeed traitors in the Order of the Phoenix, then Voldemort should have figured out that we don't intend to make Dumbledore the secret keeper. Among the remaining candidates, I am the most likely choice. Voldemort will try his best to find me, but they would never dream that we will adjust the plan and let Peter be the secret keeper, which is like having extra insurance. If he were truly caught and killed by Voldemort, Dumbledore would certainly get the news, giving him ample time to relocate the Blaine family. This was Sirius's plan, though he chose not to voice it." In the flickering candlelight, Lily finally nodded hesitantly. Even the bright moon hanging in the sky couldn't pierce the blood that cloaked the deep night. Hagrid mounted his motorcycle and vanished into the darkness. Sirius stood among the ruins on the second floor, watching Lily fall, wailing heart-wrenchingly. A chill swept over him, and the large black dog shivered, suddenly waking from sleep. For so many years, the deaths of Atticus and Lily had haunted his dreams countless times. Even after 12 years, he still remembered every detail vividly. His mind was in a daze, remorse and pain gnawing at his heart like a venomous snake. Everything before him was blurred as the big black head drooped onto his front paws, weeping silently in the thick darkness. "What's the matter, Mr. Black?" Atticus, who had been sitting for a while, asked. After a moment, Atticus Blaine waved his magic wand, dispelling the illusion. He turned his gaze to the large black dog sprawled sideways on the sofa, tears streaming down its face. With a soft sneer, he remarked, "Did you dream about your old master who failed so miserably?" End of this chapter. Chapter 233, Recalcitrant. In the eerie silence of the shrieking shack, where even the drop of a pin could be heard, a palpable tension filled the air. Atticus Blaine sat in a plush chair, his elbow resting on the armrest, his fist supporting his cheek. His gaze was fixed on the large black dog, seemingly frozen in place, and a cold smile played at the corners of his mouth. "It's hard to see you, Mr. Black," he remarked. The moment Atticus spoke, the stillness of the room shattered like ice in spring. The black dog leaped from the sofa, sprinting towards the door with all its might, driven by an instinct to flee. "Oh, do you think you can escape?" Atticus mused, raising an eyebrow as he slowly rose from his seat, a sneer of disdain on his lips. At that moment, Crookshanks, who had been roused from slumber, let out a series of frantic cries. The cat's plump body moved with surprising speed, not to flee with the dog, but to launch itself at Atticus's face, seemingly to buy time for the black dog's escape. Clang! A flash of white light briefly illuminated the dim room as Crookshanks was repelled with greater force than before, crashing into the wine rack that separated the living room from the kitchen. Its amber eyes rolled back, and it collapsed to the floor, unconscious. "What a traitor!" Atticus muttered under his breath, casting a glance at the fallen Crookshanks without a hint of sympathy. "I'll deal with you later." Meanwhile, the black dog, in its desperate flight, had reached the door. It made no attempt to open it, instead hurling its massive body against the door, hoping to break through. Boom! The sudden impact reverberated through the fragile structure of the house. Like Crookshanks, the dog was thrown back by the enchantment on the door. In midair, it let out a pained howl as Atticus's magic shattered its disguise. The transformation was agonizing, its body twisting and shrinking, paws morphing into human hands and feet, and its black fur receding. By the time it hit the ground, the dog had reverted to its human form. Sirius Black lay there, his hair hanging in tangled strands to his elbows, his skin pale and stretched taut over his cheekbones. His eyes, sunken deep into their sockets, burned with a mix of madness and resolve. Beneath the filthy, tattered prison uniform, his ribs were starkly visible, making him resemble the skeletal figure from his wanted poster. "It truly chills me, Mr. Black," Atticus said, unfazed by Sirius's ghastly appearance. He calmly rolled up the sleeve of his right arm, revealing a pale wrist, and smiled leisurely. "I've longed to see you, yet this is the welcome I receive." Whoosh! A beam of red light shot from the wand Sirius had suddenly drawn, aimed directly at Atticus's chest. But with a deft flick, Atticus deflected the curse, sending it through the ceiling and out into the swirling snowflakes beyond. "Oh, you've acquired a wand?" Atticus noted, his gaze settling on the familiar wand in Sirius's hand. His smile grew colder. "Is that the wand Mr. Longbottom lost?" "Let me go, young man. I don't wish to fight you," Sirius rasped, his voice rough from disuse, like a rusty saw cutting through wood. He maintained a crouched stance, cautiously retreating, wary of provoking the dangerous young man before him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Black, but I'm afraid I cannot grant your request," Atticus replied, spreading his hands in mock regret. "Many things remain unfinished between us. People want to see you day and night, and they are counting on me to bring you back." From the moment Atticus Blaine, the young wizard recruited by Albus Dumbledore, appeared, Black knew that tonight would be challenging. His earlier words were mere distractions, hoping to mislead Atticus Blaine into sparing him. Black had witnessed Atticus's formidable powers before. During his 12 years in Azkaban, his mind remained intact despite the Dementor's presence. He was acutely aware that he couldn't defeat this powerful wizard. However, acknowledging this didn't mean he would surrender without a fight. Atticus, his disdain for him, was Black's only hope for escape. The light from the stunning spell collided with the white barrier in front of Atticus, scattering into countless brilliant specks like a galaxy. Seizing this brief opportunity, Black dashed into the kitchen, aiming to escape through the window. But before he could reach the counter, a spine-chilling surge of magic erupted behind him. Without hesitation, Black turned and shouted, "Protego!" The sharp sound of shattering glass echoed through the room. As the protective barrier failed, Black felt an overwhelming force crash into him. His frail body couldn't withstand the impact, causing him to stagger backward and slam his back against the kitchen counter. The intense pain nearly made him lose consciousness. "You have some skill, Mr. Black, but I advise you not to be stubborn, lest you suffer more," Atticus remarked, standing in the hallway. His calm smile faded slightly, eyebrows raised in surprise. He had expected Black to be incapacitated, yet Black had managed to resist. Still, Atticus didn't mind engaging further with this infamous figure. Suddenly, a blinding zigzag of white light pierced the dark, cold air. Bent over and gasping for breath, Black thought he saw a flash of lightning. Without time to ponder the magic, he roared and charged in the opposite direction. The explosion's shockwave obliterated the kitchen wall, leaving a massive crater reminiscent of a meteorite impact. The house trembled under the force, teetering on the brink of collapse. Snow and wind rushed in, and Atticus squinted at Sirius Black, who appeared to have broken several ribs and was coughing up blood while struggling to rise from the snow. Atticus curled his lips. "I must admit, Mr. Black," he said, floating over the muddy ground with a magical shield resembling an eggshell, "your resilience is as tenacious as a cockroach." Black, looking up at the young wizard who mocked him, had a glint of darkness in his sunken eyes. He shook his wand and grinned, his pale lips forming dimples. "You're still too careless, young man," he retorted. With that, a sudden explosion echoed in the howling wind, and Sirius Black's figure vanished, leaving only the chaotic blizzard in his wake. "Oh, the inexplicable self-confidence," Atticus mused, watching Black's apparition without panic. Instead, a hint of excitement sparkled in his purple eyes. He closed his eyes, sensing the surroundings. In the next moment, he stepped forward, his body disappearing into the white expanse. End of this chapter. Chapter 234, Sadness. With a flash of ethereal light, Atticus Blaine was abruptly expelled from the state of apparition, not by choice, but forcibly ejected from the void by an unseen force. "Finally," he murmured, gazing at the bronze chain wall before him. Beyond it lay a turbulent flow of space, resembling a river, with a 5-story building floating above. Atticus allowed himself a satisfied smile. The old Black family house, nestled in Grimald Square in the northwestern suburbs of London, was far removed from the bustling Muggle city center, offering a serene and secluded location. This ancient residence was fortified with numerous protective spells and enchantments, making it nearly impossible for outsiders to breach without an invitation from the family. Atticus had failed to enter the last time, not due to the formidable bronze chain wall, but because he lacked the spatial coordinates of the mansion. Even if he had dismantled the defensive spells, he would have been lost in the spatial turbulence. However, now he had marked someone inside the house with magic, providing him with a coordinate. Earlier, at the Shrieking Shack, Atticus had cunningly allowed Blake to leave the house. Since his previous unsuccessful attempt, Atticus realized that this house perfectly matched his ideal residence. Boom! A heavy impact shattered the silence of the night. The mansion, untouched for 12 years, finally welcomed back the last surviving descendant of the Black family. Sirius Black collapsed to the ground, groaning weakly. Though he had narrowly escaped the powerful magic cast by the young wizard Atticus Blaine, he was not unscathed. The magical waves had grazed his upper body, fracturing several ribs, with the most severe breaks piercing his skin, causing blood to trickle like a stream. Despite his injuries, Sirius's attention was drawn to the old house before him, his eyes filled with complex emotions. The air was thick with the scent of dampness and dust, mingled with a lingering sweet and rotten odor. The sound of his entrance activated a row of old-fashioned lamps along the corridor, casting an eerie, flickering light on the peeling wallpaper and worn carpets of the long, gloomy hallway. A cobweb-covered chandelier shimmered overhead, and portraits, blackened with age, hung crookedly on the walls. Sirius inhaled deeply. The familiar decorations stirred unpleasant memories from the depths of his mind. He had once vowed never to return, But now, to save his life, he had broken that oath. Memories of his years living here clung to him like a persistent shadow, darkening his already somber expression. Yet he knew he couldn't afford to dwell on the past. Otherwise, the hard-won chance of survival from Atticus Blaine would be squandered. Excessive blood loss had left Sirius pale, and the pain from his broken bones assaulted his consciousness like relentless waves under a bright moon. He feared he might soon lose consciousness. Clenching his teeth, Sirius crawled toward the wall, leaving dark, shocking marks on the dust-covered wooden floor. "Not easy to endure," he muttered, lifting the tattered remnants of his prison clothes. By the yellow light of the gas lamp, he assessed his injuries with a sharp intake of breath. With great effort, Sirius raised his wand, and a swirl of white light emanated from its tip. Under the soothing glow, his broken ribs began to mend, sealed the air. The sound echoed through the dilapidated mansion, reverberating off the walls like a banshee's wail. Sirius, or rather Atticus Blaine, lay sprawled on the cold, dusty floor, his body a testament to the brutal journey he had endured. The scar on his chest throbbed with each labored breath, a constant reminder of the violence he had survived. Atticus struggled to his feet, using the wall for support. His face was pallid, drained of color from the excessive blood loss, and he felt as fragile as a ghost. The oppressive atmosphere of the old house weighed heavily on him, but he forced himself to move forward, each step a battle against the doubt, uneasiness threatening to overwhelm him. He knew he couldn't leave just yet. He needed sustenance to regain his strength and time to devise a new plan. The head of student security at Hogwarts had discovered his secret, his illegal animagus form. This revelation complicated his quest for vengeance against James and Lily, making a direct approach to Hogwarts impossible. Atticus realized he would have to bide his time, waiting for the boy and his pet rat to return home for the summer. It was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing he would have to endure another 6 or 7 months before he could act. The thought of waiting filled Atticus with despair. How had he ended up at the Shrieking Shack tonight? There were 2 possibilities. The first was that the wizard had remembered his secret experimental base in Hogsmeade and decided to check on it. But Atticus doubted this. The wizard hadn't returned in over 2 months, likely abandoning the site. The second possibility was more troubling. Atticus suspected that Remus Lupin, his former best friend, had revealed the secret passage under the Homping Willow to Amasta Blaine. Since his visit to Hogwarts on Halloween, Atticus had feared that Remus might betray him to Dumbledore, exposing his animagus form and sealing the passage. Yet, as the days passed and the passage remained open, Atticus had felt a glimmer of hope that Remus had kept his secret. But now, with Amasta Blaine's unexpected appearance and knowledge of his name, Atticus's hope was dashed. "Have you decided to kill me, Remus?" he murmured, his voice tinged with sorrow. His heart, already hardened by years of betrayal, ached with fresh pain. "This is all retribution," he whispered bitterly, a wry smile twisting his lips. Exhausted beyond measure, Atticus's legs gave way, and he collapsed, his head striking the troll leg umbrella stand with a sickening thud. The impact jarred the velvet curtains, revealing the portrait of an old woman in a black hat. Her eyes snapped open, and she drew a deep breath before unleashing a scream that pierced the silence, a sound so terrifying it seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. The mansion, which had slumbered undisturbed for many years, suddenly came to life. "You bastard!" echoed through its grand halls. End of this chapter. Chapter 235. The portraits in the room began to awaken one by one, their screams echoing like the cacophony of machinery in a Muggle factory running at full speed. The air seemed to ripple with the noise. Yet, none of the voices were as piercing as that of the old lady, who glared at Sirius, panting on the ground. After the initial shock, she bared her toothless mouth, her yellowed skin tightening as she spat. You, the prodigal son, the disgrace of the family, the evil seed I bore." The old lady in the frame appeared ready to leap out and sink her claws into Sirius's neck. "How dare you come back here? You a filthy bastard who has shamed your family. Get out of the house left by your ancestors." A fire ignited in Sirius's dim eyes. He stared defiantly at the inhuman old lady in the picture frame, who seemed tormented by a transformation spell. Suddenly, a surge of strength rose within him. He lifted his chin proudly and stood up, inch by inch. Sirius faced the old lady, who was hurling vicious curses, and said coldly, "Long time no see, my dear mother." The old lady in the portrait paused, her expression as if she had suffered endless insults. Seeing her reaction, Sirius felt a sense of satisfaction, but before he could speak further, she howled again. "Creature! Creature! You wretched thing! Where are you slacking off?" Boom! Under the dim, flickering lights, the air seemed to explode, and the house elf named Creature squeezed through the air, appearing in the bustling corridor. This house elf was aged, with more sagging skin than his body required. Though bald like all house elves, his large, bat-like ears were tufted with white hair. His eyes were bloodshot, watery, and gray, and his fleshy nose resembled that of a pig. Creature appeared beside Sirius, but did not look at him. Instead, he respectfully saluted the portrait of the old lady, bending so low that his forehead nearly touched his feet. "My most honorable mistress, Creature awaits your command," he murmured in a husky, low voice reminiscent of a bullfrog. "Creature is not lazy, my honorable mistress. Creature has served the noble black family all his life. Drive this ungrateful wretch, this rebellious bastard, out of my house." The old lady pointed her finger coldly at Sirius's chest, shouting at Creature, "Ah, so it is you, master." Creature, as if only just noticing Sirius, turned around, bowing slowly and reluctantly. He muttered under his breath, "Master Black is a vile, ungrateful bastard. He broke his mother's heart, and now the scoundrel has escaped from Azkaban and returned to my mistress's house. But why should he come back? He should have stayed in Azkaban and atoned for his foolish deeds. Long time no see, Creature." Sirius leaned against the wall opposite the portrait, clutching his aching ribs. "To be honest, I'm a bit surprised. I thought you were old and dead, but you don't look much better now. You seem old and confused." The young master always enjoys a little joke. Creature is not old. The house elf bowed to Sirius as he spoke, as if compelled by instinct. Creature knew the young master had entered the house. If not for the mistress's order, Creature would have hidden, for Creature knew the young master must have gotten into big trouble again before running back, just like before. "It will only grieve my venerable mistress." The portrait of the old lady on the wall continued to clamor for Creature to expel Sirius from the house, while Creature kept his head bowed, mumbling incessantly. Sirius's face shifted from a sickly yellow to a deep blue as he gritted his teeth and snapped at the old lady. "Shut up, or I'll have Creature throw everything out of this house, including your portrait." The old lady was momentarily stunned, clearly not expecting Sirius to utter such audacious words. Creature, the house elf at Sirius's feet, wore an indignant expression, ready to speak, but before he could, a sudden burst of flames erupted at the far end of the corridor, causing the entire house to tremble violently. "Whoa!" Atticus Blaine stomped his feet, frantically patting the flames off his sleeves. He looked at the bewildered Sirius and the grimy house elf standing 50 feet away. With a wave of his right hand, he smiled cheerfully. "Hiss! It's not easy getting into this house. Sorry, did I interrupt your conversation?" After a tense silence, the old lady in the portrait was the first to express her fury. "A filthy, lowly mudblood has arrived. Who are you, and who gave you the audacity to break into my house? Get out of here immediately." "Vile, dirty mudblood?" Atticus's expression darkened, a small bolt of lightning flickering in his purple eyes. A powerful aura surged from where he stood, like a torrent. The gas lamps lining the narrow corridor flickered wildly, as if being whipped, and the portrait frames hanging on the walls began to fall. One frame, made of precious red sandalwood, cracked as if struck by a hammer, and the ferocious old lady in the portrait rolled her eyes and fainted. "Who is this, so rude?" Atticus asked, his steps measured and displeased. "My mother. She's always been like that," Sirius replied sluggishly. But as he regained his senses and looked at Atticus Blaine approaching, a chill spread from the pit of his stomach, enveloping his entire body. How could this be possible? That was the first thought that crossed Sirius's mind. Setting aside how Atticus Blaine managed to keep up with his apparition, the fact that he had breached the house's defenses was unfathomable. This was the house where Sirius was born and raised. Since childhood, he had been told of the great efforts his ancestors had made to protect it. Everyone assured him that as long as the protective spells held, Not even Dumbledore could force his way in. Sirius had never doubted the reliability of his family's ancestral home, which is why it was the first place he thought of when he was on the brink of destruction. But now, a sorcerer had broken through the powerful spells guarding this old house and entered uninvited. At that moment, Sirius finally understood why Albus Dumbledore had chosen this young man, who seemed barely in his 20s, to head the Hogwarts Student Safety Office, a position of immense importance. End of this chapter. Chapter 236. Wait, Atticus! Before Sirius could recover from the shock of Atticus Blaine's sudden intrusion into the mansion, Creature, the house elf at his feet, let out a dry howl. Filthy, vile mudblood has broken into my mistress's house and harmed my honorable mistress. Creature's aging nose turned red, and a string of unpleasant, thick snot dangled from it. Pointing his wrinkled index finger at the approaching Atticus, he shouted, "Creature will avenge the mistress and defend the honor of the Black family." As he spoke, magic gathered at the tip of Creature's finger, ready to unleash a spell. "Wait, Creature. You are not allowed to do anything," Sirius shouted, his voice strained with urgency. Despite Creature's disdain for Sirius, the house elf was bound by the unbreakable slave contract to obey any direct descendant of the Black family. The contract forcibly interrupted Creature's spellcasting. The young master and the filthy mudblood are in cahoots. Creature's bloodshot eyes widened in disbelief as he muttered angrily. Creature knew all along that the young master brought these scumbags back to... Boom! A dazzling silver light suddenly flashed in the dimly lit corridor. Creature was flung backward like a bludger struck by a bat, crashing through the wooden door leading to the basement. He landed heavily on the stairs, silent and still. "I don't care for the stench of these little creatures," Atticus said coldly, lowering his arm. "You killed him?" Sirius turned slowly, staring blankly at Atticus, his voice carrying an inexplicable tone. "Sorry, did I upset you?" Atticus stood a few steps away, snorting contemptuously. "Should I kneel and apologize to you, Mr. Black?" Sirius's hand trembled as he gripped his wand, his voice quivering with emotion. "How could Dumbledore trust you as a wizard?" "Who knows, but I suspect he's afraid I might one day join forces with your old master. So, even if my actions are distasteful to him, he has to tolerate me," Atticus replied, tilting his head and regarding Sirius with a peculiar gaze. "Interesting, Mr. Black. You show pity and anger for the death of an old house elf, yet you pushed your former best friend to his demise with your own hands." Sirius's body trembled, and he opened his mouth to speak, but Atticus waved his hand. A silver-striped python as thick as a wrist sprang from the tip of his staff, slithering through the air and quickly coiling around Sirius. The snake's head hovered menacingly close to Sirius's sallow, gaunt cheeks, emitting a foul odor. "Let me go, you evil bastard!" Sirius roared hoarsely, glaring at Atticus with murderous intent. It was unclear whether his fury stemmed from his capture or concern for Creature's fate. Unmoved by Sirius's helpless rage, Atticus hooked his fingers, and the wand that had fallen to the ground flew through the air, landing in his hand with a whistling sound. After a cursory glance, Atticus tucked the wand into his clasp, nodding in satisfaction. "Now Mr. Longbottom can finally go home for Christmas." Sirius bared his teeth at Atticus, growling repeatedly. He struggled desperately to free himself from the snake's constricting grip, but the more he fought, the tighter the snake coiled around him. Eventually, the thick boa constrictor left purple marks on his skin, and even his lips turned a shade of red. "Don't mess." Atticus Blaine crouched down, his eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and malice as he stared into Sirius Black's eyes, which were filled with hatred and madness. "What if you end up in pieces, and the Ministry of Magic can't identify you? They might not give me the bounty," he mused aloud. Sirius was consumed by despair and frustration. He had escaped from Azkaban, evading the relentless Dementors, and swam through the frigid sea in his animagus form, all for the sake of revenge. Yet his solitary plan had crumbled. Captured by this merciless young wizard named Atticus Blaine, Sirius was now destined to be handed over to the Ministry of Magic for a reward. A sudden thought struck Sirius, halting his struggles. He fixed his gaze on Atticus, eyes wide with desperation, like a drowning man clutching at a lifeline. "Wait, Blaine, you captured me just for the Ministry's bounty?" he shouted urgently. Atticus offered a shy smile. How can you look at me like that? Fighting evil is the duty of every wizard. Of course, I can't refuse the ministry's bounty of 1,000 gold galleons, can I? I can give you more money, Blaine. Just let me go, Sirius pleaded, writhing like a trapped animal. 50,000 galleons. No, 100,000. Just let me go and pretend you never saw me tonight. I can give you 100,000 galleons. The air, thick with tension, fell into an eerie silence. Atticus's expression turned contemplative. 100,000 galleons? You'd give me that to let you go? Yes, Blaine, it's a deal. Sirius's heart raced as he saw a flicker of interest in Atticus's eyes. The Black family vault is overflowing with gold. Just let me go, and it's all yours. I swear it. Atticus stood, rubbing his temples thoughtfully. 100,000 galleons. It does sound tempting. You've certainly given me a dilemma, Mr. Black. Sirius felt a glimmer of hope, but it was quickly dashed by Atticus's regretful tone. 100,000 galleons is indeed a fortune, Mr. Black, but I can't make this deal with you. Atticus continued, if you were just a common murderer, perhaps I might have looked the other way. But you killed Lily Potter. She wasn't just Harry's mother. She was the love of my dear Professor Snape's life. I promised myself that if I caught you, I'd deliver you to him. Besides, I've already made a pact with your former friend, Remus Lupin. You've caused so much trouble, and so many people want you dead. He spread his hands in resignation. So you see, we can't make this deal. Professor Snape? Sirius began, ignoring the mention of Lupin's desire for vengeance. He stared at Atticus, dumbfounded. You mean Severus Snape, that greasy, snot-nosed git? Sirius's emotions flared once more. Wait, Blaine, don't do this. I need to see Dumbledore. Chapter 237. What about my bounty? Want to see Dumbledore? Atticus Blaine smirked, his eyes glinting with a mix of amusement and disdain. You think the kind-hearted Dumbledore will send you back to Azkaban, where you can bide your time until your old master returns to the wizarding world and grants you supreme glory? The silver-striped snake coiled around Sirius, its forked tongue flicking cruelly against his cheek. Atticus's gaze was filled with contempt. Stop indulging in such unrealistic fantasies, Black. Come with me back to Hogwarts, where your death will serve as the release for the despair and hatred that has festered in Professor Snape's heart for over a decade. It's the only purpose left in his life. With a flick of his wand, Atticus lifted Sirius, who was tightly bound by the snake, into the air, preparing to take him away. Panic finally flickered across Sirius's face, not from the fear of death, but from the humiliation of dying at the hands of Severus Snape. He could accept death for revenge, but not at the hands of that loathsome Snape. Sirius was unaware of the connection between Atticus Blaine and Severus Snape, nor did he fully grasp the depth of Snape's feelings for Lily. He knew Snape had loved Lily during their school days, but now was not the time to ponder such matters. This man intended to deliver him to Snape for execution. If James knew he would meet his end like this, "Come on, Blaine!" Sirius, hanging upside down, his eyes bloodshot and red, shouted hoarsely, "I want to see Dumbledore, Blaine, or at least let Remus come. Don't take me to Snape. I'd rather die by my own hand than his." Atticus rolled his eyes, dismissing Sirius's desperate pleas. After marking the house for later retrieval, he raised his wand, ready to apparate back to the shrieking shack. He wouldn't notify Professor Snape immediately. First, he needed to find a way to contact Remus. Only then would he summon Snape to execute Black. "Listen to me, Blaine," Sirius yelled, his ribs aching as he tried to get through to Atticus. "I wasn't the one who betrayed James and Lily to Voldemort. It was someone else." Creature, the house elf, lay on the steps leading to the kitchen, groaning as he slowly regained consciousness. He seemed fortunate to have survived. Atticus, his back to Sirius, stood in the dim light cast by a flickering lamp and the shimmering crystal chandelier above. The oppressive silence was broken only by the eerie rustling sounds within the old house. After a long, tense minute, Atticus turned slowly, his expression unreadable. His purple eyes glinted with a strange light, though his voice remained cold and steady. "Explain that statement in detail, Black." Despite Sirius's exhaustion, Atticus's commanding tone left no room for refusal. Noticing Sirius was on the brink of fainting, Atticus turned his attention to a door with a large hole in it. He walked over with measured steps, revealing a staircase leading to a kitchen on the ground floor, connected to a dining room. The kitchen was enclosed by rough stone walls, with a fireplace at the far end. Tin cans hung from the ceiling, and a table with chairs for many people sat in the center. A cupboard held cutlery and plates. Atticus stepped over the house elf's body, bringing Sirius into the kitchen, where the air was thick with the stench of decay. The long table in the restaurant appeared to be well maintained, with only a thin layer of dust. Atticus Blaine chose a chair and sat down, casually tossing Sirius onto the floor and crossing his legs. It took Sirius 5 minutes to calm down, and he quickly realized that his life had been spared, though it was hardly a cause for celebration. "Explain what you just said as briefly as possible, Blake," Atticus spoke at the opportune moment, locking eyes with Sirius. "A friendly reminder, Mr. Black. Although I dislike torturing people, if I find you're spouting nonsense to save yourself, believe me, there are fates far worse than death." Sirius propped himself up, sitting cross-legged on the ground. His yes burned with anger, both at Atticus's dismissive demeanor and his own helplessness. "Harry's red-haired friend, that boy's pet mouse, is an animagus like me. He was the one who betrayed the Potter's location to Voldemort 12 years ago. He is the traitor." Sirius's voice was laced with pain. "I escaped from Azkaban to kill him." "Ron's pet, that speckled mouse, an animagus?" Atticus's eyelids flickered almost imperceptibly. He had felt something odd about the mouse when he saw it at the Leaky Cauldron that summer. "Continue," Atticus urged, pressing for more information. "Back then, when we learned Voldemort was targeting James and Lily, Dumbledore planned to use the Fidelius charm to protect them, acting as their secret keeper. But James didn't want to burden Dumbledore, so he wanted me to be the secret keeper." Sirius gritted his teeth, seething with hatred. "I thought Voldemort would suspect me, so at the last minute, I suggested using Peter. I believed it was a clever ruse. Voldemort would come after me, and if I were killed, Dumbledore would be alerted in time to move James, Lily, and Harry to safety." "The first thing you need to answer is—" Atticus closed his eyes, rubbing his temples as Sirius cursed Peter. "Since you know you're innocent, Blake, why didn't you tell the truth instead of languishing in Azkaban for 12 years? Tears streamed uncontrollably down Black's gaunt cheeks, his frail body trembling. "It's all my fault. I deserve this. It's the price I must pay," he confessed, sharing secrets he never thought he'd reveal to a stranger. "I convinced James and Lily to trust that despicable scum as their secret keeper. They died because of me, and I need to atone for it." Atticus's expression tightened, as if he had a toothache. These Gryffindor wizards, with their heroic ideals, often acted in ways that defied common sense. From Sirius's account, Atticus understood why, after 12 years in Azkaban, Sirius suddenly sought escape. But why didn't he seek help from Dumbledore or Remus when he sought revenge on Peter? Sirius, who had been weeping in sorrow, suddenly became agitated again. "I was the one who killed James and Lily. I must kill that traitor Peter with my own hands," he gasped, his voice filled with anguish. "Besides, since they never asked me about what happened back then, it means they don't trust me, and I can't trust them either. I want to avenge myself." Atticus rested his cheek on his hand, looking pained. Sirius Black claimed he never betrayed the Potters and was wronged. If that were true, would the Ministry of Magic offer him a bounty? He pondered, feeling the weight of the grave secrets he had unearthed. "Tomorrow, I plan to request a vacation from everyone." End of this chapter. Chapter 238, You Should Be Scolded. Surrounded by rough stone walls, the deep, cave-like kitchen was dimly lit, with most of the light emanating from a large fireplace at one end of the room. Heavy iron pots and pans hung ominously from the dark ceiling, casting eerie shadows through the smoke. The silver snake that had bound Sirius had vanished, yet he remained on the floor, lying on his side. His expression was tense, and his eyes, fixed on Atticus Blaine, were filled with a masked anger. The news Atticus had received today was shocking, and he couldn't simply take Sirius's words at face value. He had delved into Sirius's mind to ensure he wasn't being deceived by these seemingly absurd claims. "All right, Mr. Black, don't wear that pitiful expression," Atticus said, clearing his throat with a hint of irritation. "Do you really expect me, someone who has never met you before, to believe your truth without question? I always find a way to verify authenticity. Despite the truth of Atticus's words, Sirius couldn't help but feel angry. After all, anyone would be furious if someone invaded their mind without consent, exposing the past they least wanted to revisit. "Now that you know the truth, Blaine," Sirius said, struggling to his feet and leaning heavily on the table for support. He pulled out a stool, sat down, and glared at Atticus with a mix of gloom and resentment. "What are you going to do now?" "What else can be done?" Atticus replied, squinting at him. His eyes held the mischievous glint of a young wizard who had gotten into trouble and was now seeking his parents' help. "Of course, I'm going to try to catch that little rat named Peter and hand him over to the Ministry of Magic. Maybe there's a bounty. I mean, let the Wizengamot put him on trial to clear your name." "I don't care about innocence, Blaine," Sirius shouted after a brief silence, waving his hands in frustration. "I just want to send Peter to hell. I've been dreaming of taking his life ever since I found out that scumbag was alive. Now that you know I'm innocent, Blaine, you can help me get into the Gryffindor dormitory and catch that rat. I'll dismember him with my own hands." "That's easier said than done," Atticus sneered. "In my view, there are two issues that urgently need to be addressed. No issue is more important than killing Peter Blaine." Sirius, who had been tormented by hatred during his 12 years in Azkaban, was barely holding on. His sole reason for not breaking down was his desire to avenge James and Lily. Even though Atticus knew Sirius was wronged, he couldn't bring himself to like him. Conversely, Sirius didn't like Atticus, a young wizard with strong magic but ruthless methods who seemed obsessed with galleons. Moreover, Atticus Blaine had connections with Snape, whom Sirius despised. If he could, Sirius would have gladly rid himself of Atticus. "The first issue," Atticus said, his eyes deep and thoughtful, pointing his index finger at Sirius, "is something you might not know. A month ago, on the second night you broke into Hogwarts, Ron's pet rat, Scabbers, was found dead. Ron discovered bloodstains on his bed and a few of Crookshank's yellow hairs nearby, which almost caused a rift between Ron and Granger, Harry's two good friends." "That's impossible," Sirius interrupted, his voice filled with fury as he clawed at the table with his nails. "I bet it's a hoax, that scumbag. He's faking his death. He did the same thing when I cornered him on that Muggle street before I was imprisoned. He's definitely not dead. That cowardly, shameless rat must have sensed the danger and—" "He hid in advance," Atticus Blaine said coldly. "Stop babbling. Who do you think caused this trouble, Mr. Black? Whether it was the fall of Voldemort or your stroll out of Azkaban, Dumbledore has plenty of ways to clear you of suspicion. He could have sent Peter to Azkaban for a lifetime of prison meals, but now we have to find a mouse that could be anywhere in the world. Mr. Black, maybe your brain is rusty, or perhaps you have no brains at all. But I still want to ask, what are you planning to do? Spend the rest of your life chasing a mouse around the globe?" A friendly reminder. According to Muggle scientists, there are about 200 billion mice worldwide. I imagine you're thrilled to hear that number because it gives you something to channel your excessive energy into. If it had been more than 10 years ago, Sirius would have drawn his wand and challenged Atticus to a duel over such an insult. Even now, hearing Atticus speak this way, the thought crossed his mind. But the harsh reality was that he didn't have a wand, and until Peter was dead, he needed to stay alive. "I know Peter," Sirius said, his face flushed with frustration. "I'll bet he's still at Hogwarts. He wouldn't dare leave because doing so would mean giving up the protection of the Ministry of Magic and Dumbledore." "So what?" Atticus retorted, his expression still unfriendly. "Are you planning to dismantle Hogwarts' School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and dig 3 feet into the ground?" Sirius fell silent, but Atticus quickly raised a finger. "Second thing, why do you think I would help you, Black? This is a mess you created, and you cost me a bounty of 50,000 gold galleons. I could pretend I didn't hear anything from you tonight and kill you. No one would blame me. Not Dumbledore, not Remus Lupin, not Harry. Cornelius Fudge would even thank me and personally award me a Medal of Merlin, first class, just for helping the Ministry of Magic solve a big problem. Of course, I'm not so heartless as to take your dead body for money, knowing you're innocent. But why should I help you enter Gryffindor and catch Peter?" You should be grateful if I don't kill you." Sirius would have cursed if he could. He never intended to reveal the truth about James and Lily's sacrifices, nor did he plan to ask for help. Otherwise, he would have sought out Remus long ago. It wasn't carelessness that led Atticus Blaine to capture him and send him to be humiliated by the Ministry, but he couldn't voice these thoughts because he knew Atticus Blaine was undoubtedly a Slytherin-born wizard, one who wouldn't pity him for his innocence or help him in the name of justice. "Follow me back to Hogwarts to meet Dumbledore," Atticus said indifferently after a long pause. "For the sake of Harry and Remus, I won't let the murderer who killed the Potters go unpunished, but you need to discuss with Dumbledore and Remus how to catch Peter. I have my own matters to attend to. Since it's confirmed you won't harm Harry, I'll be leaving Hogwarts soon." "No," Sirius replied stubbornly, hearing Atticus's suggestion to explain everything to Dumbledore. "I won't tell anyone the truth. I don't want to see them until I've killed Peter." "Why?" Atticus sneered. "Now you feel ashamed of your stupidity? I'm sorry, Mr. Black. I can't ignore what I've heard, and I don't want to play a tedious revenge game with you. Be quick about it. I won't sleep all night, and I hope to at least catch breakfast at Hogwarts after dealing with your troubles." End of this chapter. Chapter 239, New Transactions. "Dumbledore and Remus, I don't want to see either of them now," Sirius exclaimed, leaping back to avoid Atticus Blaine's hand reaching for his shoulder. "I won't beg you for help, Blaine. Just don't reveal my secret, and I'll find a way to catch Peter myself." "Forget it, Black," Atticus replied with a grimace. "As the head of the Student Security Office, I can't let you cause chaos in the castle. Whether it's Dumbledore or Remus, someone must keep an eye on your actions." Atticus understood Sirius Black's character well. While loyal to his friends, Sirius was undeniably a paranoid egomaniac. Allowing him to run amok in the castle would inevitably lead to trouble. If it were only his own safety at risk, Atticus might have considered it, but the potential harm to the young wizards in the castle was unacceptable. "Don't make me use magic on you, Black," Atticus warned impatiently, waving his wand threateningly. Sirius clenched his fists, glaring fiercely at Atticus. Without his wand, he couldn't apparate, and even if he had it, he knew he couldn't put up much of a fight. His only option to express his anger might be to transform into a dog and bite Atticus when he wasn't paying attention. How could Atticus Blaine be persuaded not to hand him over to Dumbledore? Sirius pondered this desperately. Suddenly, the burst of sparks in the fireplace sparked an idea. "Wait, Blaine, I want to make a deal with you," he said hastily. "A deal?" Atticus raised an eyebrow, a flicker of interest in his eyes. Sirius noticed the change and felt a glimmer of hope. He knew how to handle this powerful young wizard. "Don't hand me over to Dumbledore and Remus. Help me get into Hogwarts to find Peter," Sirius gasped. "You want the bounty offered by the Ministry of Magic, right?" "Blaine, how much is it? 50,000 galleons? No problem, I can pay you that amount." Atticus pursed his lips, his expression showing a violent internal struggle. "No, Mr. Black," he shook his head. "I can't abandon my principles for money. Letting you roam freely at Hogwarts could endanger innocent young wizards. I can't ignore that possibility, Mr. Black. My conscience would never allow it." "Conscience? Do you really have one, Atticus Blaine?" Sirius thought bitterly. "I just want to kill Peter, Blaine." Sirius's sallow face turned livid. "Unless I've lost my mind, I would never harm those children. Fine, I'll pay double the amount for my freedom of movement." "These wealthy heirs are so infuriating," Atticus thought indignantly. "The glib, ungrateful young master is lying again," came a sudden voice. Creature, who had been eavesdropping from the stairs, slowly crawled out, causing both Atticus and Sirius to change their expressions. Atticus immediately looked at Sirius with suspicion. Meanwhile, Sirius, surprised to see Creature alive, felt a mix of astonishment and relief. Recovering his composure, he asked in a sinister tone, "Have you been playing dead all this time, Creature? When did you become so clever? And what do you mean by saying I don't have a coin in my pocket? If I remember correctly, the Black family's vault should be filled with gold coins and treasures, preserved for centuries and worth at least hundreds of thousands." Atticus's lips tightened further, really wanting to. After the incident at Gringotts, Creature became noticeably more respectful. He descended the stairs, halted in front of Atticus Blaine, and pressed his fleshy nose to the ground. Creature wishes to apologize for his previous rudeness, esteemed and powerful Mr. Wizard. Creature must tell the truth. My honorable mistress despised the young master. She considered him a prodigal who cared nothing for the family's glory. She refused to leave any property to him. Before she passed away, my mistress left a will, distributing all the contents of the treasury to Miss Bellatrix and Narcissa, whom Creature adored. They are far more noble than the young master. Sirius's expression darkened visibly, though his face was already grim. As Creature had he had no interest in the so-called glory of the Black family, nor did he care for the tedious gold. Yet the fact that his mother preferred to give all the wealth to others rather than to him stung deeply. Typical of my mother, Sirius sneered dryly. However, he noticed something unsettling in Blaine's calculating gaze. His heart raced as he quickly added, I have my own vault, Blaine. My uncle Alfred left me a sum of gold in the underground vault at Gringotts. I can give it all to you. Sirius fumbled with his tattered jacket, eventually producing a small piece of parchment stamped with Gringotts' seal. What is this? Atticus inquired, having never deposited money at Gringotts. I used my owl to order a firebolt for Harry earlier, using money from my own coffers. Last time he played, those dementors turned his broom into a pile of sawdust. This is the Gringotts receipt. It states that I still have more than 3,000 galleons in my treasury. Sorry, Mr. Black. It was somewhat surprising to see Sirius so invested in Harry, yet Atticus remained unmoved. He replied calmly, I've thought it over, and I still can't trust you running around Hogwarts. In my opinion, we should consult Dumbledore. He must have a way to help you find Peter. Sirius seethed with anger, his hands trembling. That's all I have now, Blaine, he gritted out. If you're not satisfied, there might be some valuable old items in this house. You can take them all. Creature's eyes widened in horror, ready to scream, but he found himself unable to make a sound. Atticus had preemptively silenced him. Don't think too poorly of me. Atticus shook his head, defending himself. I'm not after your fortune, Mr. Black. I'm simply seeking my reward, the Ministry of Magic's bounty of 50,000 galleons for you. But now that you've lost your family inheritance, I have a different idea. Sirius, oblivious to Creature's predicament, glared at Atticus and demanded, Tell me your solution, Blaine. I want to know how you plan to promise not to hand me over to Dumbledore and Remus. Here's the deal. Atticus's demeanor shifted, his eyes scanning the kitchen with interest, his tone turning amiable. Since you lack the gold to compensate for my loss, I propose you temporarily mortgage the right to use this house to me for 1 year. After a year, if you gather enough gold, I'll return the house to you. If you can't, with interest, you'll need to extend the mortgage to 2 years. If after 3 years you still can't repay, the period will extend to 4 years. As Sirius stood there, taken aback, Atticus smiled and continued, Certainly, I will also permit you to reside in this house for as long as you live. End of this chapter. Chapter 240. Lenny. Although Atticus Blaine was eager to dive into cleaning his new house to make it comfortable and pleasant as soon as possible, he knew he didn't have the time right now. Instead, he had to endure Creature's loud wailing and vicious curses directed at Sirius. Atticus ordered Creature to leave things as they were, planning to return during the Christmas break to tackle the house that had been unoccupied for 10 years. Don't cry, Creature, Sirius said impatiently. You've heard everything, haven't you? It's just a temporary mortgage on the house, and I don't plan to sell it. Once I deal with Peter, I'll be able to make up the 10,000 galleons soon. Oh, what would my poor mistress say if she knew the young master had given away all the old houses of the Black family? The mistress would be so disgusted with him. Oh, she would be disappointed with Creature, and Creature watched helplessly. All of this can't stop the young master from doing stupid things. Atticus found Creature quite unlikable and briefly considered selling him to the underground world, where house elves were in short supply due to the giant monster massacre. However, he decided against it. Instead, he gave Creature a strict order. You are not allowed to tell a third person in any way what you heard tonight. With a pop, Atticus led Sirius back to the Shrieking Shack. During their absence, the collapsed kitchen had been covered with a layer of snow, and the cold wind howled through the holes in the house like a wailing ghost. Atticus waved his magic wand, and the broken bricks, planks, and beams on the ground stirred to life. They shook off the snow and flew back into place, restoring the house to its former state in the blink of an eye. Although he had decided not to use the shrieking shack anymore, Atticus restored it to avoid drawing unnecessary attention from the villagers of Hogsmeade, who might wonder why it had suddenly collapsed. "The cat you called Crookshanks is freezing!" Sirius, who had rushed into the house to find Crookshanks, exclaimed angrily. "As long as it's alive, I can revive it," Atticus replied. He tapped Crookshanks' stiff body with his wand, and a stream of red light washed over the ginger fur. White steam rose as Atticus took out a bottle of homemade potion. He tapped the bottle with his wand, and the liquid inside transformed into an upside-down stream of water, flowing out of the bottle and into Crookshanks' nasal cavity. "How did you get along with this cat?" Atticus asked casually as Crookshanks began to stir. "This cat is very smart. I guess it has nasal blood because it recognized me as not a dog the first time it saw me," Sirius said, stroking Crookshanks and smacking his lips. "It took me a while to let him know who I am and what I want to do. Since then, he's been helping me find news and food. I can't run around with the Dementors and Aurors in the village. He even tried to bring Peter to me, but it didn't work." "Speaking of," Atticus said, dispelling the phantom magic. The parchment scattered on the living room floor, and the small animal remains in the kitchen became visible. With a few flicks of his wand, Atticus conducted an invisible symphony, and the debris rushed into the hall, where it was consumed by a brilliant green flame. "This house. It's mainly about the secret passage. How did you find it?" Atticus inquired, knowing that the answer might touch on some of Remus's secrets. Dumbledore had recruited Remus as a professor at Hogwarts, and it was impossible for Atticus Blaine, the head of the security office, not to know about Remus's identity as a werewolf. However, Sirius couldn't take any chances. If Dumbledore and Remus hadn't informed Blaine about this, it might cause trouble for his old friend. "This secret passage, we used it a lot when we were in school," Sirius said vaguely, causing Atticus, who was tidying up, to pause abruptly. "We?" Atticus squinted, repeating Sirius's words. "So, Remus has known about the secret passage under the Homping Willow for a long time. Presumably, he also knows you're an animagus. He had plenty of opportunities to mention it, yet when Harry told me about the passage tonight, Remus acted as if he was hearing it for the first time." Sirius remained silent, absent-mindedly petting Crookshanks, whose limbs twitched slightly. He could guess why Remus had kept quiet, not knowing Sirius was innocent. His old friend, who saw Dumbledore as a benefactor, feared disappointing him and incurring his displeasure with their antics. How did Harry find out about the secret passage under the Homping Willow? Another detail in Blaine's words caught Sirius's attention. "Everyone who knew James Potter says Harry is just like his father. I suppose he inherited some of his talents." "That kid really does look like James." Sirius perked up. His Quidditch skills are just as impressive as James. At that moment, Crookshanks, fully awake in Sirius's arms, bared his teeth and claws, hissing at Atticus with his grumpy expression. "Calm down, Crookshanks. We've cleared up the misunderstanding, and now Atticus won't be causing us any trouble," Sirius reassured, holding Crookshanks tightly. "It's not my fault," Atticus protested, looking innocent. "Who would have thought things would turn out like this? Before, I thought you were aiding a notorious criminal, so my actions were entirely justified, right?" Crookshanks grumbled, appearing troubled. The night's chaos was finally winding down. Snow continued to fall, but a pinkish dawn was breaking in the sky. "In my opinion, it's better for you to stay hidden at home or in the mountains like before. I can send you food regularly, but if you're determined to return to school and cause a stir, we'll need to find a way to disguise you," Atticus suggested. Sirius dismissed the idea. "I'll just use my animagus form. I can disguise myself well. No one will recognize me." "I suggest you reconsider," Atticus retorted sharply. "If you plan to stay in the castle for long, you'll inevitably encounter Remus. He knows you're an animagus and your transformed form. For the sake of our arrangement, let me remind you, while animagus is a perfect disguise in terms of magic and form, on a soul level, you're still Sirius Black." Unfortunately, our beloved headmaster Albus Dumbledore can perceive a person's soul, so you'd better be cautious. What do you propose, then? Sirius asked, his mood darkening. He wasn't fond of the cautious Slytherin. Atticus had already considered this issue while at the old Black family house. As Sirius eyed him warily, Atticus raised his wand, causing Sirius to step back defensively. "What are you planning, Blaine?" Sirius demanded. "Of course, I'm arranging a new identity for you. Do you expect me to parade around with a wanted criminal?" Atticus replied, glancing at Crookshanks. With a smile, he said, "From today onwards, you are the little stray cat that Crookshanks discovered outside. It seems Crookshanks has chosen a companion for itself. I believe Lenny is a fitting name." End of this chapter.